Namaste and greetings. I, Sana Ansari, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, New Delhi. Extend my warmest welcome to you to all IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today marks the 9th day of Young Women Leaders in Public Policy Fellowship, Cohort 2.0. The theme, Getting Foothold in Politics, Governance, and Gainful Employment, a Gender Lens. This is an online national winter school program, a 4-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program spanning January to April 2025. This program is organized by IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center. The chair for this program is Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI and renowned advocate for gender equality and women's empowerment, while the co-chair is Professor M. Indira ji, former professor of economics at the Department of Studies in Economics and Corporation, University of Mysore. We are honored to have Professor Vibhuti Patel ji and Professor M. Indira ji and Dr. Purnima Chauhan ji, IAS retired former Secretary Government of Himachal Pradesh and Director Himachal Pradesh Institute of Public Administration, visiting Senior Fellow IMPRI as esteemed speakers for today's session. The panel of convenience for this program comprise Dr. Simi Mehta ji, Dr. Arjun Kumar ji, Professor Gummadi Sri Devi ji, and Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam ji. Before we start today's session, I would like to state some housekeeping announcement. Please join the meeting on time. There will be Q&A session after each presentation. Share your question in the Q&A box only, not in the chat box. The question must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. Now, without any further delay, let's start to this program. And today, I would like to invite our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, to deliver the opening remarks and first session along with Professor M. Indira ji. We welcome you, ma'am, and over to you.
Yeah. So thank you, Ms. Sana Ansari, for introducing the course. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to the IMPRI team, especially conveners Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, and coordinators Ms. Priyanka Negi, Dr. Vaishali Singh, Mr. Satyam Tripathi, Reetlat, Ritika Malik, Sweta, and Bhaktiba Jadeja, and also moderator Ms. Sana Ansari. And today's expert, Professor M. Indira and Dr. Professor Indira Ramarao has a medical emergency. So her topic, gender parity in politics and governance, I will be taking, and I'll be conducting that session. A brief overview of what all has transpired so far is as follows. That we had on the first day, we discussed, program started on 5th of January, and we had a keynote address by Comrade Annie Raja, a renowned political activist, who spoke about women getting foothold in politics and the whole history of women's reservation right from 1994 till the date, and what kind of muscle power, money power, misogyny, and mafia power that women have to face when they enter the public domain. She also provided much food for thought by saying that now what are we going to do? Because now in 2029, we will get 33% reservation for women in the Legislative Assembly, Legislative Council, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. And then we have to prepare women to take up these whole complex issues of governance. And that should be, our focus should be on that. On day 2, we had Professor Vidyut Mohanty, who spoke on the bursting the bubble of traditional leadership, women's leadership in grassroots politics, and she shared her 40 years of experience of working with the elected women representatives in Panchayati Raj institution. And she also gave a very inspiring examples of women's leadership in Panchayati Raj institution and the models of empowerment which were created by some of the panchayats. And she also said that it is a very roller coaster ride that women need to have, but at the same time, it is important to have a TOT instead of deriding women for not knowing the complexities of contemporary governance. It is our duty to organize the training programs, and capacity building is very, very important. in the for the women elected representatives. On day 3, we had Professor Chaitra Redkar, who talked about the regional dynamics and women's political leadership with a specific case study of Maharashtra, and she said that the state which came into existence after a very, very robust and militant social movement. It was formed in 1960, and women had played a pivotal role in the Samyukta Maharashtra movement. But what we saw that in the post independence period, as it has happened all over the country, same in Maharashtra also, women are very, very less in proportion to men in the political structures. There is a lot of resistance to women getting in the upper echelons of power. Maharashtra was the first to have a women's policy. It was also started implementing 33% reservation. This is the only state with over a dozen all-women panchayats, and 50% reservation is currently granted to urban and rural local self-government bodies. But still, when it comes to the women in legislature, legislative assembly, legislative council, and also in the parliament, you see a very scant representation of women. And even the ministerial birth, it is very, like, if you see current context, there are not many women have even got the ministerial position in the state. On day 4, my presentation was a gender gap in workforce participation of Indian economy. I tried to provide the explanation of the declining work participation of women, and also the number game and a lot of statistical acrobatics that is happening in our country regarding work participation, and also the reasons for decline from 2013 to 2020. 21, and after that, currently the periodic labor force participation rate is showing 34% rise in women's workforce. But that too is mainly in the area of self-employed or among the unpaid care workers. Unpaid care workers being classified as on-account worker doesn't solve the crisis that we are facing. And we need to address this question and create a more enabling atmosphere and an enabling ecosystem for women, so that women who are educated, who are skilled, they can translate their degrees into career. We had a presentation by Professor Tara Nair, who spoke on women's leadership in entrepreneurship, and that she gave us so many important examples of successful models of entrepreneurship by women in certain among the marginalized section, especially the collective endeavor of Self-Employed Women's Association or Jagori or Anandi. She said that is replicable. But what we see is that when it comes to women with who want to get into the high investment arena of enterprise, you see that lot of resistance they have to face, right from the financial institutions to the enterprise ecosystem. No, so women scholars who have looked at business enterprises run by women and women, they have identified differences in the leadership style, motivation, vision, and ultimate goals. And gender norms play a very, very important role. We may have a one or two queen bees like Kiran Majumdar Shaw or Anu Aga, but largely women face tremendous resistance when it comes to high investment area. On day 5, we had Professor Shashmita Palo's presentation on navigating the leadership tightrope walk that women have to have, where she provided the evidence-based strategies for women in success. She gave several models, leadership models within the corporate governance, and she said that the areas like the question of pipeline problem or question of the male biases within the corporate governance, giving different attributes for the same type of performance to men and women. Even the attitude and the behavioral science methodology, when it is applied, you can clear cut, you can see the patriarchal bias in performance rating of men and women in the corporate world. And that's the reason we see that most of the time women are allowed to enter the managerial position, but they stagnate. And she also tried to unpack the glass ceiling phenomena or glass cliff phenomena, glass lip phenomena, and sticky floor phenomena, and in the public and private sectors of corporate world. On day 6 now today, the professor Indira had chaired the session, and she can share the brief outline of what all transpired on that day.
Oh, you want me to see day 6?
Yeah.
1 minute.
Should I read?
Yeah, I don't know where it is.
Okay.
I did.
No, I have it here.
I sent it to you, no?
Okay, yeah, I have sent. So day 6, we had 2 presentations by Dr. Nivedita Haran on women's leadership as administrators in state governments, in central government. And the second one was by Dr. Purnima Chauhan, who is present today also, women's leadership roles in governance of local self-government bodies. And the first presentation where Dr. Nivedita Haran discussed various events and activities that have happened in last 2-3 years, and have and asked the participants to note what they felt about each of them. And she also emphasized the need to look at what our education system is failing to inculcate in our students, that doesn't help them to become employment worthy or income earning worthy. She gave examples of pollution level of Dal Lake and housing scheme, and Kerala's housing scheme, digitization of land records, misuse of technology, migration, violence in temporary shelters, etc. She observed that decentralization of implementation is very important, as we are good at planning but poor in implementation to take the plans to the last person. She quoted examples of Kerala to explain how social awareness and proactive people can make difference. The second speaker, we had Professor Chaudhary. She also talked about Dr. Purnima Chauhan. She spoke about the gender parity in employment, stating that the conceptual clarification about gender parity, gender discrimination, gender sensitive policies. She discussed the issues of gender discrimination in workplace, particularly in India. She highlighted the wage gap between men and women is not entirely due to differences in education or the years of work, but due to unexplained factor that they face. She also provided some of the experiences of herself as a administrator in the government of Himachal Pradesh. And she also said that how she tried to use the participatory action research and also various methods of involving community and bottom-up planning that helped in addressing some of the mind-boggling issues. She also discussed the
ये दोनों उठा लो, ये भी उठा लो.
recruitment policies to ensure equal opportunities for both men and women, and adhering to legal framework like Equal Remuneration Act, Sexual Harassment, Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act. The role of employees in affecting women in the labor market participation was also emphasized by her, and she focused on both the broader ecosystem effort and specific form of local level initiatives. The mechanism for implementing gender-sensitive recruitment policies, such as blind recruitment, diverse hiring of panels, gender-neutral job description, flexible work arrangements, proactive outreach to female women candidates, and training on gender biases and inclusive hiring policies are very important. And it was acknowledged that implementing these policies can be challenging due to societal gender stereotypes, lack of awareness, and unequal access to education and training. On day 7, we had a very this thing, Manime Klai, who spoke on women workers in informal sector. And she also focused on the global workforce, women in the global workforce. She shared a metadata on global workforce situation from the World Economic Forum and Gender Gap Report. She also talked about the women in informal sector, largely how 94% of women who are in informal sector face various types of discrimination, and how the Article 14, 15, and 16 are violated in the labor market. The most violated of all is Equal Remuneration Act, which was passed in 1976. But she said that it is very important to form the women's associations, women's union, collective endeavor are very important. We need to guide our research to focus on labor processes and labor relations. And we had on day 8, Professor Alka Parikh, who spoke on women in agriculture. It was very important because agriculture remains generally neglected in such courses. And she gave, right, starting from the whole women's official data on women in agriculture and their contribution to Indian economy was highlighted. And she said that how women face a lot of difficulties in terms of accessing essential things like water or fertilizer or market outlets. And she also dwelled on complexity of agrarian problems and informed that agriculture is shrinking, proportion of contribution of agriculture to the economy is also shrinking, and men are going for a more of a cash controlled economy, while women are there in the subsistence economy. They are invisibilized. Their contribution is, though so important, is not acknowledged in official discourses, and that's why women also lose out in terms of their entitlement. So the recognition of women as a farmers, the recognition of women as a food producer, that is extremely important. She gives some of the important examples of how NGOs have worked with the state to get women's entitlements, and also come up with a income earning and livelihood supporting activities in vermicompost, or where the Jivamrut is prepared, organic fertilizers, or income generating activities of mushroom cultivation, production of biofertilizer, biopesticides, the kind of work which the Uthan in Ahmedabad, Anandi in Gujarat, Masum in Pune have done. And she also concluded her inspiring lecture with the recommendation that the state needs to translate its intentions into action, because intentions are there. So many new schemes have been given about the farmers cooperative or Kisan card or subsidy in various forms, but the intentions don't translate into action. And now today we are on a 9th day where we are going to have 2 presentations. Thank you. So, Professor Indira, you are going first, or should I go first? What do you suggest?
No, actually today my presentation is not there.
Then it is my presentation.
Yeah.
Because
my presentation got over. Actually,
yeah, it got over, and I also summarized it.
Yeah, day 6
timetable it
was,
isn't it?
day
Okay.
6.
So my presentation is on
And-
its role in governance and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Indira would have been here, but she has not.
Yeah,
come.
yeah. 1 minute. Is it
Professor
visible?
Patel, Professor Patel, I go after you. Purnima Chauhan.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Acha, yours is not over, huh? Okay. Because I was also not there at that time. Okay. So this is the first one was by Dr. Indira Ramarao, and as she can't make it, I am now presenting my presentation on the same subject. Is my PPT visible? Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So gender parity in politics and governance is the topic. We all begin with the salutation to secular humanists Savitribai Phule and Fatima Sheikh, because because of which we got the modern education and became capable to take part in the public life, and where governance is very important. Our foremothers who played a very important role in formation of Indian Constitution, which has granted equal opportunity, equal treatment, and equal rewards to both all citizens of India, is very important. They are our role models. They played a very important role both as politicians. So many of them entered into active politics and played a very important role. Others were in this field of governance. They were the bureaucrats. They worked in the foreign service or in the different departments, built several important institutions for the country. If we see the currently global gender gap, India has a gender gap of 62.9%. And we have been able to close the gap of 62.9%, but we still have a challenge of over 38% of gender gap. Because of the economic, we have a gap in economic participation, educational attainment, health survival, and political empowerment. We adopted unanimously, the Indian government and in the parliament, it was unanimously accepted in women empowerment policy, which talks about access, welfare, equal opportunity, and the role of the state in making transformative policies and budget. We also have a draft national policy for women in 2016. Several roundtables took place, but the draft has not been converted into a policy, but it has tried to uh, include the issues which unfolded from 2001 to 2016. Politics of women's movement is also very important in inspiring and building confidence of women to take part in politics as well as in governance, because personal is political has been the motto of women's movement. When the world leaders were talking about world peace, women were talking about women's movement gave a rebuttal with that peace begins from home. Unless you have a peace in your home, you can't play a pivotal role for the community or for the nation. Women also started saying first time, like we don't make coffee, we make policy. When you are in a public office, you can't be just treated as a person who is the kind of work as an extension of housework, but you are there, you mean business. So politics is not only electoral politics or membership of political parties, but also collective action of women against oppressive patriarchal power, with a long-term goal of social transformation that ensured women's liberation from exploitation, degradation, and dehumanization. So getting foothold in political spaces and in women public spaces became very important, and it became the new momentum came after 1975 International Women's Year towards equality report played a pivotal role. And during the decade of 75 to 85, this debates of women's participation in decision making became very important concern. So women in administration, women in judiciary, criminal justice system. So we started, like, more and more young women started applying for first of all, qualifying for Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service as a judges, the Foreign Service, and they faced glass ceiling. They also faced discrimination in the initial years. They also challenged. They used the Equal Remuneration, ERA, 1976. So many of them used ERA to get justice. Women's policies of the state government, more than 10 states came up with the women's policies, and some of them also promised to have a 1/3 seat in all apex bodies. For example, Maharashtra was the first one to declare in all apex bodies of the governance at the state of the state government, at the subnational level, they would have women in the more decision-making bodies. National Commission for Women and state commissions for women were established. Affirmative action and supportive services were also came up in terms of couple-oriented transfer policy, or safety of women became an important issue. critical mass theory, that if there are one or two women, it is very easy to silence them. So even in the public platforms, whether you are in the administration or in the criminal justice system or in politics, you need to have a cluster approach. There should be more than, because it is so easy to witch hunt or silence a woman. So critical mass theory, that was also applied to the 73rd and 74th Amendment. So in 1994, we had 30% reservation for women. In the Panchayati Raj institutions, we had a very exhaustive session on that by Professor Vidyut Mohanty earlier, that what is happened, the dynamics of Panchayati Raj, this institution we have discussed. And India also signed CEDAW, Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. But still, what we see, the current scenario, if we see that women remain scarce among high courts and Supreme Court judges. So you can see here the state-wise profile of how many women are there as compared to men as judges in our courts in different states. So this gap still remains. So when it comes to women with mandated power, you find less and less number of women. Similarly, in the states and union territories, if we see the question of women's quota in the police force, like Maharashtra decided to say that 25% of the seats would be reserved in the new recruitment, but there were no applicants. So that is what also happens, that you need to create the multi pronged approach, and you also need to have intervention so that women, first of all, you need to have a height, body strength to get into the police force. The rigorous training that you need to you have to undergo, that also becomes very, if you are malnourished, if women are anemic, then they cannot they continue with the rigor of the police exercise. So I think lot needs to be done when it comes to, it's just not by giving quota, because there are not enough applicants in the police force. The quota is there. So I think we need to address that issue. Another thing is the women in Army, Navy, or Air Force, or women in different professional bodies, and like women in the legal profession, you find less number of women. In political structures, we see that women had a toehold in the post-independence period. After 73rd and 74th Amendment, we see that they are gaining foothold. We have 6 rounds of elections at a Panchayati Raj institution, and so many of them are now aspiring to the next election. They would want to get tickets from their political parties or contest as an independent member, because the reservation will be applied in 2029 elections. Journey of the bill, we heard a whole story from Dr. Annie Raja, so I'm not going into it, but we have seen that it was introduced several times, and it created so much of rebuttal from the male politicians, thinking that only women from the upper caste and upper class will take away all the seats. But we have reservation within reservation discourse also happened for the SC, ST, and OBC women. Women have there have been performance reports of the women in political bodies of Panchayati Raj institutions also, and IRD UNDP study has also shown that women make a better economic performance. There are fewer criminal charges on women. They are less corrupt, and they get work done, and they are conscientious. In fact, famous sentence that the way we look after our family, we look after our constituency. So we have seen that there have been so many studies which have happened over last 30 years at a state level and at a national level about women's reservation. We have our neighboring countries, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh. They have also provided women's reservation in the parliament, and Pakistan made a provision of 33% reservation of seats for women in the National Assembly, and 36 out of 342 seats, that means 17% seat in the Senate as per the election law quota in 2002. Bangladesh has ensured 15% reservation in the seat. So even when the South Asian meetings and official consultations take place, India is always there is a naming and shaming of India, that why don't you have quota, when you know that it is difficult for women to be successfully be in the elected body, looking at the very militant patriarchy that we are facing. Mobilization of women by the political parties, we have seen that politicians have used and by evoking a slogan of Stri Shakti way back in the 80s, which Mrs. Indira Gandhi did. BJP in 1990s talked about the identity politics, and during the mid-90s, we had the Telugu Desam Party, which ensured women's right to land, and the Telugu TDP was the first one to ensure land rights to women, and women voters, they very enthusiastically supported that party. We have seen the implications of increased political participation of women, where we see that women's visibility in the political scenario, they have agendas, they get agenda setting power. It also brings the qualitative change in the political goals and processes, as we have seen in the European Parliament. And the meetings, camps, welfare programs, weekly meetings, national conventions organized by different political parties of the women cadre that we have seen, mainly because of the pressure from within. So during last 3 decades, we have seen that political parties have come up with the women's front, and this women's front have also become very active. We had a Shetkari Sangatna, which came up with the all-women panchayat, about which we got a detailed profiling by Professor Vibhuti. So percentage of women MPs currently, if we see in the various Lok Sabha elections, it is abysmally low. And that is why the Mahila Women's Reservation Act passed in September 2023 becomes very important. So representation of women in it is not only that they are not there in the elected body, but even when it comes to offering candidature, political parties shy away of it. This you can see, except for Trinamool Congress, none of the political parties have even given candidature to women to contest the election. And the argument of winnability doesn't hold water, because women's winnability has been much higher than that of men. You can see the success rate of men and women MPs contestant. Women's success rate is much higher than that than that of men. As you can see, the red line is above blue line in the graph. So official data, if we see of the latest election, we have 542 total Lok Sabha members, out of which 78 are women, and total women in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are 102. As per the Inter-Parliamentary Union, women make up 14.44% as in the 17th Lok Sabha. And according to the report of Election Commission of India, women represented 10.5% of all members of parliament as of October 2021. So as compared to that, from 10.5, it has gone to 14.44. For all the state assemblies, women MLAs representation stands at average of 9%. So that is really a very, very sad scenario so far as the subnational level politics is concerned. We still have a right from the very beginning of the women's movement till now, we have so many controversial issues which have played pivotal role in women's participation in electoral process, and also women as a voters, the kind of parties they have chosen in their constituency. Women candidates face various types of hurdles, character assassination being the most devastating and negative reaction that women candidates face, and so many of them, that's why withdraw also. And elected women representatives, they face the challenge of money, muscle, mafia power, and also misogyny, because that we saw recently in the last election. There's so many dirty and highly objectionable comments were made about the personal lives of women candidates. So reservation of seats for women in electoral bodies, I think now that we will see a qualitative change with the quota being implemented from next election. So demand women's movement and the women's organization, they also prepare charter of demand in each and every election, around which they organize their program, or Know Thy Candidate program, they do advocacy. So women elected representatives in Panchayati Raj institution also prepared their charter of demand and demanded from the state that they should be given more supportive environment and infrastructure. And they have also asked for a toll-free number for a helpline for any kind of emergency that they face to run while managing their own constituency in panchayat. Demands of the elected representatives they have also included the literacy training program, capacity building program, legal literacy program, all the new GRs that come about that, they should have a up-to-date knowledge, and also very periodic consultations, and also question of land rights or women's entitlements in the anti-poverty programs also have been highlighted by them. They are, wherever women are supported, the elected representatives are supported by the women's groups or NGOs or civil society organization, they find it easy to cope up with various power blocks and their bargaining power increases. A lot of advocacy material has been disseminated by the women's organizations throughout the country, thanks to training of women elected representatives, in which the women activists are invited. We have seen the change in the women voters' psyche also. There was a time where family decided whom to vote. The current elections, last two elections, it shows that increasingly women are independently deciding who they would like to vote. No? The sociologists have found that. 11-point women manifesto, which is called Womanifesto, plays a very important role in each Lok Sabha election, where women's groups all over the country, they come together and they come up with the common demands in the health sector, in the area of education, and the equality in the legislation, leadership and political empowerment, gender budgeting, gender mainstreaming, monitoring and evaluation, climate-related issues and environment, specific schemes for marginalized and excluded women, increased livelihood and employment for women, and women's role in peace processes wherever the conflicts take place. So this is her story of women in decision making in political realm. And also Nari Shakti Vandan Abhiyan is not only going to affect the electoral scenario, but it is also going to affect governance, because women's leadership in political governance impacts women's leadership in the overall governance, whether it's a corporate governance or it is a administrative governance or the governance of the local self-government bodies. It creates an ecosystem because of the agenda setting power that with the voters give to their leaders. So currently we are facing the gender gap. This is the latest scenario where gender gap index shows India to have achieved as compared to previous years by 8 points, but still India's rank is 127th. That means we need to do a lot to get our house in order, and whatever has been promised is also comes into practice. So nurturing of women's leadership and in every sector of the economy and society becomes very important, along with the macroeconomic policies, including fiscal and monetary policies, gender transformative financial policies, which gives more resources to women. Because even if you are elected, and unless you are able to change the scenario or develop your area, nobody would respect you. So it is very important that gender budgeting also is implemented. These are some of the references which you can refer. They are very easily accessible, and they are in the public domain. This was the song we had written in 1980 when we all went to Delhi in support of Mathura, a tribal girl who was raped by a uniformed policeman, and Supreme Court had given a very, very misogynist and highly objectionable, unjust judgment. And all women activists of India had encircled the Parliament of India demanding justice. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your enlightened session. Now I would like to open the floor for Q&A session. Participant can raise their hands or type the question in the Q&A box.
We can have Q&A session after Priyanka, after
Dr.
Dr.
Purnima.
Purnima's
Okay, ma'am.
presentation, because
Okay,
these
ma'am.
issues have been discussed in 2 sessions previously also at a sub-national level and Panchayati Raj
Sure, ma'am.
institution level. So we
Moving
can
forward.
have it after.
Okay, ma'am. Moving forward now, I would like to invite Dr. Purnima Chauhan ji to deliver the session on women's leadership roles in governance and local self-governance bodies. She will provide valuable insight into the role of women in local governance, the challenges they encounter, and the pathways to fostering inclusive and effective leadership at the grassroots level. We welcome you, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Sana. And as always, Professor Vibhuti's preface is so interesting, so engaging, that my interest in this sector of gender grows every time that I engage with IMPRI.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to IMPRI for having given this opportunity every time. And also the WhatsApp groups. I think there is so much information that my husband thinks that I have entered college or university all over again. But
Yeah.
because you see, the fact is that gender is not a one-stop shop. I
Correct.
tried doing that in HIPAA, creating a one-stop shop to answer. But in order to keep abreast of what's happening
Right.
and what are the challenges and to be able to answer questions, which are
Very
real-life questions,
right.
one has to have a very vibrant kind of a gender resources center, which doesn't exist.
Right.
And that is my biggest worry, that despite having a training institute, and as a bureaucrat, I know that that training institute is like a melting pot for all kinds of departments to be trained over there. Now, tell me any better place where you should park a gender resources center. It's almost because even in the SDGs, if you look at the SDGs, what are the broad-based sectors? Climate change and gender. So these broad-based sectors, which intersect with every other sector, need attention. That's the only way of center staging them. We can wish and we can hope till the cows come home, but nothing will happen until we take positive steps towards that. And I am sorry to say that in my own state, I had opened a gender resources center in HIPA, Himachal Institute of Public Administration. And unfortunately, it seems to have died a natural death 10 years after it was opened. And hopefully that now that HIPAA is trying to do things in a new way, we will probably open up. Let me see if I can share my presentation. Otherwise, I'll send it to Priyanka as she had suggested. And maybe then I can have the whole screen or whatever. Just a minute. Let me just try this full screen karke. Share screen. And I should have my presentation on it, no? Yeah. So what do? I click on my presentation, Sana?
Yes, ma'am.
I just click on my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, ma'am, it's starting. Yes, ma'am.
It is starting. Good Lord. I think I've achieved something. So, because in the last 2 episodes, it was like, it was a little difficult getting to. Just a minute. I just
Yeah.
might need to sort of, इसको बड़ा कैसे करूं? My toolbar is hidden.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that is making.
Do they have, does IMPRI team have your PPT?
No, I'm going to send it then.
Ma'am,
Then send it. They will.
I think.
sorry, ma'am, under the where you are putting this cursor, you could
Yeah.
see a cup kind of a thing, which will
वो तो
maximize
पता है
your
मुझे.
PPT.
I know,
Yeah,
I can
sure,
do that.
sure.
I can do that, but I am trying to access my, to enhance this. Just a sec. Let me see what have I done. ये on है, ये on है. मैं अपनी पीपीटी को बढ़ाने की कोशिश कर रही हूँ अपने लिए.
वही, हाँ, अभी भी ये हो रहा है पर
नहीं, टूल बार वो तो ये अभी कर दूँ. That is okay. आपका हो गया ना? Yeah, okay. You can see it now?
Yeah, but it cuts, no? No, full text is there.
Cutting?
Yeah, only thing it is. Yeah, just make it full screen, no?
I have done it.
Acha,
I've done.
yeah.
The cup sort of a thing, I've already done it. So now we are at the first one, and let me see how I can. Okay. Okay. So now is it visible?
is
Ma'am, but we
visible.
can see the slide number 21, not the first
Not,
slide.
not
Yeah.
really. Okay.
Yeah, no, it,
Just
it
send. I think Priyanka, you share it from your end, no?
yes, ma'am.
मैं प्रियंका को भेजती हूँ.
सही बात.
You know, I will just sort of 1 sec. Let me get this going. I'll have to. एक तो I don't want to leave the meeting because there's too much happening over here.
Correct.
Yeah, this wretched thing just seems to eat me completely. All my
Correct.
technology goes to the dogs when it comes to this. But yeah,
Now it is okay. Now it is
Ma'am, now
fine.
it looks
Yeah.
fine. If you just see top में insert home, insert design, animation slideshow ना, वहाँ से slideshow पे click करके एक बार try कीजिए.
एक सेकेंड.
अभी अच्छा हो गया.
अभी ठीक हो गया. ये बाय चांस हुआ है, मैंने कुछ नहीं किया.
अच्छा.
ये किसमें बोल रहे हो आप?
हाँ मैम, ऊपर होम दिख रहा है ना, होम इंसर्ट डिजाइन. मैम क्लिक नहीं कीजिएगा. इंसर्ट डिजाइन एनिमेशन, आप राइट को मूव करते जाइए जहाँ पे होम दिख रहा है. ऊपर स्लाइड शो दिख रहा होगा रिव्यू के बगल में.
मेरे को रिव्यू के बगल में, जस्ट अ मिनट. मेरे को नीचे वो जो कप जैसा बोल रहे हो वहां बोल रहे
हाँ
हो?
हाँ, वो आप, हाँ वो भी एक बार ट्राई कर सकते हैं.
ओके, अब कहाँ हो आप?
ओके, अभी तो कोई चेंज आया नहीं है इसमें.
ये गेटिंग नाउ वी आर एट द फर्स्ट स्लाइड, टाइटल स्लाइड
वी आर एट
Yeah.
स्लाइड नंबर 3.
3.
हाँ,
Yeah,
क्योंकि मैम अभी स्लाइड शो मोड पे नहीं है, ये वर्किंग स्लाइड वाले मोड पे ही है और उसमें नंबर 3 स्लाइड है.
वही मुसीबत है कि मैं हर बारी ऐसे कर रही हूँ तो वहीं फ्रीज हो रहा है.
नहीं,
So,
आप उन्हें ईमेल कर दीजिए.
हाँ, मेरे ख्याल में मैं प्रियंका को ईमेल कर ही देती हूँ. That is
यस मैम.
just a minute. Give me a second. Because leave meeting will be a disaster.
No.
And कुछ नहीं पता यहाँ पर. And I'm sitting in the jungle, as you know it.
No.
Our house is in the jungle, literally. So anyway. Okay. Compose. Priyanka. So Priyanka, no subjects. I'm just writing Purnima, PPT. And I am attaching. Where does it keep? It's taking rather long. Okay. Did I not send? Priyanka, just check if you've got it.
Not yet, ma'am.
Not yet. It says view message. Sent. I've already sent it.
Yeah, I've just received.
Received.
For small mercies. So,
Yeah.
So now let me see if I. Yeah. So let's get on with this. You can see me?
Yes, ma'am, we can see you.
Okay.
Just give me a second, I'll just upload it.
Done. Are you in Himachal?
Yes, very much so. I was out of the country for a long.
Correct.
I was in
Yeah.
Canada, then I was in Thailand,
Yeah.
and
You
of course, one realizes the value of one's own state only when one goes out. That it's
Correct. मेरा भारत
beautiful.
महान.
मेरा भारत महान, हिमाचल भी महान. पर प्रैक्टिकली महानता मेरे को नजर नहीं आ रही है.
वही तो, बाहर जाते तो अपनी याद.
हाँ, political महानता नहीं है.
बरोबर.
अच्छा, so now you can see me because I can't see anybody.
Yeah, we can see your PPT. हाँ.
Okay, good. So, in fact, it's a pleasure always to be talking to the young fellows and to the researchers. And it's admirable how many different subjects they take up, because all said and done, as I said, this is such a broad-based sector that you cannot confine yourself. And this temptation gets the better of me. And that's why I always end up with 40 to 45 slides. And let me see how much time permits. And
No, don't
as a bureaucrat, the first thing that one feels is that the buck stops at you. And this is what has actually prompted me to go beyond one of those enthusiastic feminists in college. From that level where I was asked to actually speak on frailty, thy name is woman. Now, it was worse than a slap on the face because that was totally against my grain. How could I never liked Shakespeare for this particular aspect. How could he say frailty, thy name is woman? And when I was forced to actually speak in favor of the motion, and I had to look for examples including in our tradition and in the modern world in politics, and Indira Gandhi was a prominent figure at that time. And that is the time I realized that the shoe really pinches. And that is the time I also discovered that if this problem is of such a big magnitude, and fortunately, having been born into a family where they gave so much importance to girls, I don't think I had been the victim of gender biases. And that continued. And so, in a way, that was a gap in my learning. And that is the time I realized that if this is where the shoe pinches so many people, it must be pinching me. I'm not aware. So this was a blindness which I had, and I realized that opening of the eyes and wearing a gender lens is very, very critical, not just for me, and then it transcended to my family, to others. And that is the time I realized. Later on in the job, went to Manchester, and Uma Kothari from India, she was from Gujarat, and she was taking a session. In fact, I opted for that subject. And that is the time I actually had my closest encounter with gender issues. And that was the impact of the structural adjustment program on women, the differential impact. And I'm sure Professor Vibhuti will bear me out that that was quite a game changer. This was in 1999. 1998, 99, when I took up the subject, because I said, how can development have different impacts? It just didn't make sense to me. And that is the time when my eyes were opened to the reality. And that is the time I realized that efforts had been afoot from over a century to make sure that through the welfare approach, through the WID, WAD, GAD, I think this has been covered in earlier sessions also, women in development. And just now also Professor Vibhuti spoke about it, women and development and gender and development, and the effectiveness, of the effectiveness approach, mainstreaming gender equality, all these formal, protectionist, corrective, substantive approaches. There had been such a lot of effort by women globally. But the thing is that women partnering with women in itself is an achievement. They have so much to do. They have so much of the care work with them that taking that time out to, like the suffragette movement, for instance. And I think for us, it was actually women's participation in the freedom movement that gave us a fillip that we had never thought we will get, and more than the suffragette movement. So all these feminist waves, and I think there has been a very, very engaging session that Professor Patel had put together, in which all these feminist waves were discussed. And some of them led to the 1975, the UN's first women conference in Mexico. And even 5 years before that, Esther Bozerup, who's a name to reckon with in her book, Women's Role in Economic Development, it influenced the third wave of this movement and led to 1973 US Congress bill to include women in the development programs. This was critiqued. This bill was critiqued as being very Western centric. In fact, her work was also critiqued. It was versus the global South. It ignored the private sector participation and emphasized more on public arena focus. So gender and development was a game changer in the 1980s when Anne Oakley came up with this. That why are we harping only on women? There is another category called men. And now, of course, the transgenders are also included. That without men, how can there be any change? And when this change, and the second part which I would like to emphasize subsequently is that this change is not merely for women. They may have been oppressed, but whatever change is done for the sake of women or this vulnerable category, there are other vulnerable categories also. This will impact economies as a whole. This will impact men as a whole. This will impact the country as a whole. So who are we working for? When we are working for gender empowerment, we are working for everyone. So how can it be only women centric? So gender and development was the focus which Anne Oakley brought. And the origin of her thinking was also from the DAWN, that is Development Alternatives for Women project. And I must say that we are very fortunate that we had thinkers even before that, like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who spoke about deeply entrenched, horrific practices which were prevailing in this country, like sati. So look at this, that these are men who are speaking about women. And I personally came across an example of how gender blindness perpetuates apathy, complete apathy. In HIPAA, when I was director there, and I felt that since I have brought in the gender responsive budgeting into Himachal Pradesh in 2006, it is my responsibility to see that it becomes an outcome oriented, not just an output. Because we have a process, then we have the outputs, and then we have the outcomes. But if I don't see it to its logical conclusion by my own efforts, I'm failing in my duty and responsibility. And fortunately, in bureaucracy, without knowing how long your tenure is, you handle different departments at different points of time. So earlier when I had finance, that is the time when I went for a conference to Delhi. That was my game changer also. And this was in 2005 when GRB, gender responsive budgeting, was very, very new in India. I think there were just 9 ministries which had done anything called, gender responsive cells. They were created over there and they were doing very, very minimal work on gender sensitivity. Otherwise, it was the women's component plan before 2005. Now, in a hurry, when Government of India was doing it also, they decided that the same 30% component will be put into gender issues as a financing mechanism. So it didn't make sense to me that why gender budgeting is a separate component from budgeting, normal budgeting. But then after that, of course, you have things like performance budgeting. And now with gender responsive budgeting, the first question that one asks is why? Why the prefix of gender? And the reason was that development, which is sought to be achieved through the budget, has differential impacts on men and women. And that was the first thing. And it reminded me of that session on structural adjustment program, which I had undergone in Manchester, that yes, globally also there were differential impacts. Nationally also there are differential impacts, and go further, go to the states, go to the local bodies. This particular differential impact you will see everywhere because the issues are at a smaller scale, they are the same issues. Now, how do you combat this issue which has permeated? It's like a dimak, which has gone right through. How do you combat it? The first problem that you come across is the patriarchy in the DNA. But another problem which exists is that women themselves don't know that there is a problem because validation has happened from their mothers, from their grandmothers, from their mothers-in-law, from every other woman in their family. So they don't find anything wrong in perpetuating the system which has already happened. Now, I'm not saying that you're just simply correcting a social wrong. Here, we will come to a point where we discuss how there is an economic spillover. There is even a climate change spillover of empowering women. So this patriarchy in the DNA in this conference in Delhi, which was done by the Women and Child Department, I must give credit to the Secretary of Women and Child that time, who had this lady Anjali from the Railway Services, who was the director there. And she had a 3-hour session which unfolded, revealed, it's like peeling off an onion, that every activity in the rural, in the tribal areas, for instance, you're collecting, let's say, a resin from the forest. The first cut which is made in the tree is done by a man. After that, any visit to the forest will be done by men. But treating that, processing that, who does what is done, what is used, what is produced, all these questions are handled by women. Men come in the beginning and it is like coming at the end of the film. And that is when you have to take the processed product to the market and you sell it. That is the time the money comes in the hand. And where does power reside? Power resides where the money is. So they get to decide, they get to make the choices of how to expend it and how to use it. Now, these are not the things which, since it had been happening for so many years and years and years, decades, women also had gotten used to their role playing. Similarly, in HIPAA, when we decided that when I became director over there, we decided that we're not going to have any workshop on the 8th of March. We'll have it before or after. So we did it on the 6th of March. We didn't want tokenism at all. And on the 6th of March, and this is a very important thing that we did, we decided that we are going to only select some sectors. Gender is very tempting. It impacts every sector. There is no sector which is gender neutral. So we could have gone ahead and achieved nothing by having, every sector being represented in that workshop and probably achieve no results. But even before we started the workshop, we structured it in such a way that we will focus only on 3 or 4 things: the rural area, education, health, and violence against women. Now, in just these 4 sectors, we decided to have the workshop. And who are the stakeholders? We realized that the stakeholders majorly are from the government, and that too consciously. We invited people, a male and a female, and then from the academia and from the civil society. So every one of us, whether it's an education group or a rural area group or a health group, or it was a group which is dealing with violence against women, we had these people sitting together. Now the interchange which should happen, the platform that IMPRI has created is invaluable for this reason, that we interchange ideas over here, which doesn't normally happen. We work in silos so often, and that is the bane of the government. Whenever I hear all the research material that is coming here, I really feel that I wish I was back in government to be able to implement some more of the things which I keep getting to know every day. So that is because gender empowerment is a work in progress. And these close encounters of gender blindness were brought to light that time when we made a report on our progress and we decided what will be our outcome. So we had an output, and our output was pre-decided that in this HIPAA workshop, we are going to have 4 modules. And what modules? 4 modules for training every department on just these 4 sectors. And these modules, we also didn't want to reinvent the wheel. They existed in Labasna, in Masuri Academy. So we decided that we'll get the Labasna framework and modify it, contextualize it to Himachal's needs. And then further, since HIPAA was undertaking training for the northeastern states also, we decided in the second phase, we will modify them to cover the mountain states as a whole. So women affected in rural areas, in education sector, in health sector, and violence against women were the 4 areas we would cover for this large span of women and the geographical area. Now, having decided this outcome, and why I'm sharing this with you is, if you strategize any change, you have to be very sure what is the outcome you want. It can change during the process, but at least you have calculated and said, we're not going to waste time. We are going to make sure, and that is important for us as a bureaucrat because we have only very limited tenures. You want to show any outcome, you got to do it in a time that which you don't even know whether it's 3 months or 3 years. So having done that, we made a report, sent it to Government of India, Ministry of Welfare, Women and Child, sorry. And those people were so happy with it. They sanctioned us funds for having a state level workshop, training workshop, and 2 district level workshops. My biggest takeaway from there was that we got 2 men who literally came. One was from education, one was from Khadi, literally came with tears in their eyes after the state level session and requested me with folded hand that please take us as resource persons for your district level trainings. You have 2 phases of that, because we never knew what kind of injustices we are perpetuating upon the women in our family. And blindly, because we didn't know that the role playing that we are doing, the role playing they are doing quietly, they are almost invisible, they don't complain. Hence, no voices of complaint are heard, so they think they are all right. Now, that was a game changer for me, that these 2 men were asked, in fact, all the members were asked only to come with 2 things. that you're going to instill gender responsive budgeting in any policy or program related to your department. What did these two come up with? They said, Madam, we want to be the harbingers of change. That kind of change, that kind of sensitivity coming into two men who were born and brought up in a traditional system and who are working with the patriarchy that predominates the corridors of the bureaucracy and the government, if they could be changed in just 2, 3 sessions, I am sure that was very encouraging that yes, with more and more sharing, which we are doing over here, we can deal with the subject of removing the gender blindness, wearing the gender lens, and then tackling even horrific practices. So that is why when I go back to think that what challenge Raja Ram Mohan Roy undertook in Swami Dayanand Saraswati, I am really amazed and I bow my head to them. So this brave new world that we have thought that we will create will be done only when there's overcoming of the trust deficit, and India suffers hugely from it. In fact, there is an organization in Sweden, World Values Survey. I would request that if you take a look at it, you'll see that the trust deficit levels of various countries, which define what is the character of that country, take a look at it and take a look at the arenas in which trust deficit has an impact. So it's not easy. The first thing is that if I'm sitting in the government and I'm doing policy, I'm doing a top-down approach. Whereas theory says, and other country experiences now that I have obtained, it says that a bottoms-up approach is more sustainable. How to get women to be involved in creating that kind of policy or participating in that? I'll come to those examples from Sweden. So this, another thing I realize is it is such a vast sector that it is almost like, you take a balloon which is full and you touch one part of it, you'll find everything else rising around it when you press one part of it. Similarly, gender is such a thing, such an arena that you touch one part of it, the impact is felt, it's a ripple effect all around. So what is the approach? Is it a single sector approach, dual sector approach, triple sector approach? My answer is it's a carpet bombing approach. And I found that that was the reason why, because budget affects everybody, every sphere. It was the best instrument in which to start mainstreaming the change towards a more empowered citizenry. And why I say citizenry, you empower women, you empower everybody. And more than that, it is not just the budget. Gender responsive budgeting has an outcome orientation which should be visible in the statement 20, which accompanies it. Please look for that. Every state should be having the statement 20 now, which is an annexure to your budget statement. And it has two parts to it. The part A deals with all those schemes, programs, policies, which are 100% women oriented, and how much is spent on them is mapped every year. And what is not done in most of the cases is the physical achievement. Unfortunately, that is still lacking. Only the expenditure is mapped out over there currently. So that is an arena of change in which perhaps if you want to research, you could do that. And the other part of the statement is part B, in which schemes where less than 100% or more than 30%, sorry, up to 30% is being targets are women. The changes in development are targeted for women. Now, unfortunately, when there are only expenditure statements, you can't make out what was it that you wanted to change. Did you even ask yourself, where are we and where do we want to be? If you haven't done that, you really don't know what is the kind of change that you want to do. So here we went about doing other changes when as Secretary Administrative Reforms that let us capture not just gender data, but development data at the district level. So it was being captured by the Public Affairs Center that which state is doing better than which one. Smaller states were in one category, larger states were in another category. Women's issues were also included among a 100-point indicator chart. Now, I saw that, and I saw that when we started implementing it in Himachal, we realized that as you look at the data, it tells its own story. That in 2 years of mapping what was women's status on various counts in the 12 smaller states of India, that is the mountain states, and including Delhi, we realized that in 2 years, we had slipped among 12 states, we slipped 5 places. And this is when Himachal prides itself on being a highly gender sensitive, gender empowered state, but data tells otherwise. So that is why gender analysis, data analysis, audits are extremely important. So gender responsive budgeting is a tool which is a beginning. But to do gender mainstreaming, we need to have regular gender analysis and gender audits and the plethora of forms, etc. And the very important thing is disaggregated data. There is no beginning without that. And that cannot be in just a few sectors. It cannot be partial. This has to pervade the entire ecosystem, that disaggregated data, because there is no sector which is gender neutral. Hence, if data has not been segregated, somebody has not made the effort. So can we do that? Can we take it up as one of the arenas for research, that which are the sectors? It's very easy to do, things like nurses, teachers, but what about disaggregate? And of course, the vital sectors like land ownership, disaggregated data, does it exist? Let's say transport, does it exist? And you would say, how does transport have any impact? Just imagine today with all the insecurities that you see, just now we had the Pune case. Supposing you are deciding in the transport sector that you want to put in place a bus stop. What are the factors that will go into your checklist? That how many passengers are there? How far is it from a busy area? How far is it from the offices? What is the frequency of bus service that you should have? What is the size of bus, route permits, etc.? Has anybody even thought that among the category of passengers, there is a category which is vulnerable, and that is not just women. It is pregnant women, it is the younger women, it is women who are working late hours, it is also the aged, which includes women, and it is also those with disabilities and those who have little children with them. Now, when all those are included in the checklist, and I am, let's say, director transport or secretary transport, and I create that checklist, I am leaving a legacy behind which doesn't need me any longer. If we can make these changes, these kind of institutional changes, mechanisms, we are making systemic change. And that is where the procedure becomes improved and gender gets mainstreamed. These are very small things. They may look like small things, but they have a very large long-term impact. So we tried to do these things. We created a district good governance index. And then I will come to it later, that how that revealed a story which was not known about how Himachal also has feticide. Now, I'm very glad to know that today Government of India is trying to push down the sustainable development goals. They have a national indicator framework, a state indicator framework, and now we have a local indicator framework also, in which out of 17 goals, 15 of the sustainable development goals are being pushed down as 9 themes. That's another area of research which can be seen. And once we do all these things and we realize how women either suffer or are progressing, then we will not call it a jungle. We will find a way through the jungle and we will value women. So these complex gender intersectionalities, they will upset the apple cart. So don't be afraid when you're going through change. As a bureaucrat, I had to ignore the fact that yes, there will be many feathers which are ruffled when I do these things. But then that is the cost, that is the price that you pay for change. So that is where the bravery lies. This particular picture, this so-called power walk, who is powerful? I don't, even a blind person can probably see who is powerful, who has a smile on the face, and who's carrying all the burdens. Is this a level playing field? Is this the inequality that women quietly take? Why don't they speak? Why are they not seen? This misogyny and patriarchy needs a gender lens desperately. And this prevailing systematic disempowerment, what is a little girl going to learn? That this is her future. So inequality is not just born of deep-seated patriarchy. It goes from generation to generation and perpetuated not so much by men as by women, because they're socially conditioned for this role playing. Whereas social conditioning should be confined primarily to the biological role playing, which is sex determined, about which neither man nor woman can do anything. If you have to give birth to a child, that a woman can do. If you have to feed the baby, that a woman can do. But that is breastfeeding. Other feeding, men can also do. So what are the approaches to equality? When we do formal equality, and this is exactly where our budget was, or in fact, every country's budget seems to have suffered until sensitization was permeated. Now, one of our friends who decided that she didn't want her daughter to become like a girl, no pink for her, no dolls for her, no kitchen sets for her, and none of those, the makeup kits and other things. So on the 7th birthday, this lady thought she had got equality in the sense she wanted her daughter to be like a boy. And she decided that she's going to have a nice big party for her 6th or 7th birthday. When the people left, guess what the toys were with which that girl was playing? She was playing with a kitchen set and she was playing with her doll, the exact same toys that she had kept her away from. Because what she had seen her mother as a role playing. And I'm not saying that the mother should stop entering the kitchen. I'm just saying that you realize that change is not going to happen by these artificial insertions. So equality also doesn't happen by saying that you have budgeted for this much water or food to be shared, irrespective of the manner of the beaks and the mouths that these animals have, these birds have, whether they're accessing what you have given them, have they got access to those inputs or not? So what is the desire? Are you targeting just giving or you are seeing the outcome? So this is exactly where the formal model of equality failed. The second goes the other way. The second model says, women, if they're vulnerable, protect them. If their workplace is unsafe, lock them up in the houses. This protectionist approach is not going to empower women. It is only going to make them dependent. ये पिंजरा नहीं चाहिए. So these stereotypes also start developing. Women shouldn't do this, women shouldn't do that. It is for their good, they shouldn't wear clothes like this. Now, so the kind of interventions, the first one that we have brought food for everyone, is everybody going to get it? So the question that faces us is there equitable access? Is it a level playing field? Now, creating that level playing field is not so easy. It's a continuous, focused, multi-pronged exercise to correct centuries of disempowerment, but that will automatically happen when you realize one size doesn't fit all. And gender policy and strategy both have to be game changing. So corrective approach recognizes that some people are in an unequal position and they have to be treated differently from others. So just now we talked of, quotas being given for women, but for instance, in panchayats, where you have many of them providing 21 states giving 50% reservation. So this positive bias that we have towards women's election, but if the election is going to only throw up that, okay, the woman wins, but the actual player or the pradhan is a husband, is that going to actually make any change happen? So this apple cart of making sure that the woman attends the meetings, she does the job that she's entrusted to. That took a lot of doing also. When I was director urban development, I remember that I asked myself this question, where is the training program for these elected representatives? And the answer came, there was no training program for men or women. None of the elected representatives. So I said, what are they going to do for 5 years? So they will ask the secretary what they are supposed to do, and the secretary then is the leader. And that is exactly why our urban local bodies were absolutely non-functional. So I decided to take things in my hands, and I called an organization from Chandigarh. CRID is the name. And we designed an orientation program, and then we designed a special program which will be scheme related and give in-depth knowledge to the participants. Now, I thought that we had done our task by designing this training program in two phases. The reality hit hard when we decided that, okay, we'll send the urban local body representatives from these particular districts for training to Chandigarh. And we thought it'll be a good outing for them. Suddenly, we started getting refusals from the elected women representatives. So when I asked them that find out why they're refusing, the answer was that we have never stepped outside our district. We can't go alone to Chandigarh. So I had some budget. So I told them, I said, okay, you can take one person along with you, whether it's your son, whether it's your husband or whatever, but you have to go for the training. I will not take any excuses. And then we told the Chandigarh people that just in order to make them aware of how spatial planning is so beautifully done there and how other utilities, etc., are planned, give them enough field exposure. Believe it or not, after the first training, more and more women came forward that we want to go for training. So this is how आपने उनको बेटी बचाओ, बेटी पढ़ाओ, पर उनको आत्मनिर्भर भी बनाओ. That is very important. So why do we have to become victims of the present system? You have to look for ways out of it. So as a bureaucrat, it was not enough to implement the law. It was not enough to say, oh, this hasn't happened, or this is an arena. For instance, even today, transport department doesn't seem to have had a transport secretary who's a woman. It seems as if it's the domain of men. Now, if that is the mindset and the bias that we have, how is change going to happen? Now, there are certain, how do you create a level playing field? If you want women to actually work shoulder to shoulder and compete with men and get better reports or be chosen for the work. So, a national creche scheme in 2022 was revised and subsumed as part of the Palna scheme under Mission Shakti. So it was to provide daycare facilities for children of 6 months to 6 years. And mind you, this category is very important because there's another figure which says that motherhood leadership penalty, where only 10.2% female managers are there versus 89.8% men who had children below 6 years, because their care responsibility is so huge that they cannot take on managerial tasks. And 16.3% female managers versus 83.7% men had no children. So this whole achievement that women should work, etc., get a level playing field, unless you provide daycare facilities, this will not exist. And mind you, the tragedy is that in this country, so many women in the unorganized sector, they are completely deprived of any such facility. In fact, even maternity leave, etc., is not available to them. So when we are looking at one aspect of empowerment, we have to look, where does this, it's like a chakra view, where does it touch others? So, and this is, mind you, that the motherhood leadership penalty that we find in India, the global average is 25% and 31% female managers with the same category of children or no children. Whereas we have just 10%, global average is 25%, and whereas we have 16.3% female managers without children, we have 31% female managers globally. So the desired outcomes or change have to be pre-charted. They have corrective interventions need to be very sensitively done and preferably in a participative mode. Because there is no official blueprint, the last bullet point is important. This is an area which is a gap area. There is no official blueprint to conduct outcome evaluation, and this is the UN admitting this. So how do we bring about something which is desirable, substantive equality? What does it mean? Equal opportunity, equality of access to resources, equality of results. It takes into account, very frankly, very transparently, the differences and focuses on the diversity, which may be biological, which may be social, it may be political, economic, and differences, disadvantages, and the discrimination which has been perpetuated over the centuries. And then it starts doing affirmative action. And mind you, despite women having achieved a certain position also, it is very surprising that they are denied entry to certain, like, I think the temple entry issue, that is Sabarmati temple and others, that is an issue which is still uh, engaging, the jury is still out on that. But just by simply having pink boots and pink police chowkis is not enough. This time in Himachal, there's a place called Pangi, which is absolutely unapproachable. It is only now that one can actually make it easily, not easily, but with a lot of, through the road. So the first female resident commissioner this time was, was a woman. And this girl, I respect her for another thing is that she decided in Solan, she was a trainee over there, and there was a puja which was being done, and it was a local tradition, and the DC was a man. It is surprisingly that this lady, she was a probationer, but she was functioning as the SDM over there. She was told that she cannot enter the puja. And why? Because she was a woman. And mind you, she not only opposed it, she decided she is going to sit through the puja. She put in a written complaint. She even took the matter to court because she saw that the DC was not serious enough. The man was going with the tradition. He didn't have the guts to upset the apple cart. But this lady, she did. This is what I call Nari Shakti. Not simply 250 women on the Republic Day parade, but that is collective action. But these are the kind of women who are game changers. So we are looking at GRAP, we're looking at gender reform action plan at the global level, but a paradigm shift can only happen when equality of outcomes is politically desired and socially desired. It's probably more easy to have politically desired outcomes being put down in a law and through a bill, but having the paradigm shift at a social level is very, very difficult. My experience with Malmo in Sweden was very interesting. That we had gone to see the town planning committee, and they told us how they have a participative approach to how do they plan the cities. I mean, where is the gender component in planning a city or planning houses? So they told us of an anecdote where they were planning the city. They had representatives from the city, and mind you, Malmo has about 173 ethnic groups, and they had representatives from all of Malmo. Now, these people were told how they're going to plan according to the natural layout of the city, that this is how you're going to have the sun, the water, the trees, the mountains, etc. And this is where we will plan your houses, the schools, and the utilities and other things. And how the houses will be planned, even that action was shared with them. Now, a group of Somalian women, they got up to object. Their objection was, please don't put windows in the kitchen. Now, can you imagine the extent of detail in which they were discussing even before putting a single brick in place? If that is the kind of participation that we had, then I think our outcome would have been fantastic and totally oriented with the public at large, and there would have been no conflict of interest. Now, the reason when these town planners asked these women, they said our culture is such that if there is any window from which someone can see us, we are supposed to wear the hijab, and we are 80% in the kitchen. So if you have to, we can be seen through kitchen windows, we'll have to wear the hijab. Now, I don't know what was the resolution that they came to, but look at the manner in which they involved in the planning. And they must have found a solution, because that is exactly why it stands an example of substantive equality. So gender is not a core competence. And this was revealed to me when in 2006, we did a study on what is the contribution of women's unpaid care economy. And this was only for Himachal. And we were shocked to see that the figure was something like 12% of the state GDP. And whereas women are mostly seen as if they are just caregivers, and all the women's conventional programs, agencies, they all focus on their role, which is confined, not on a larger role. It was only one of our DCs, DC Mandi, he realized that perhaps he can use women's native intelligence and street smartness. So he had a program in which they had to identify disasters, both natural and man-made, and then make an action plan. Now, this guy, he called the women, the local women over the self-help groups, and he asked them, what do you think is disaster? So he started from the basics. And you know what was the answer? They didn't have any high-fangled things like earthquake and flood and all that. They said if there is gas leakage in the kitchen, so their maximum time was spent over there. But look at the native intelligence with which they came out, that, okay, if there's gas leakage, that can be a disaster. It can be a threat to life. So he said, okay, we'll start with this. So how do you plan to identify it, and what is the extent of the problem, and how do you feel that you should mitigate it? Do you know, those women went about actually writing a report, a small little paper in their own local language, and they conveyed to the DC what are the actions that they should be taking. They became so empowered that they're getting heard, they are being used, they are being trusted. That later on, I remember Sandeep telling me that every time I have a new policy from the government which has to be tried and tested, piloted, I call this group of self-help groups, and all of them, they discuss it threadbare, and come up with innovative solutions. So poverty also is experienced differently Power is also experienced differently, and 1995 HDR report says that poverty has a woman's face. 1.3 billion people in poverty, of which 70% were women. And this is a data which is only increasing despite the Sustainable Development Goals. So it is shocking to know that even our huge flagship program of JNNURM, which is a game changer in urbanization, especially urban infrastructure, it excluded sectors like health, education, or gender concerns. There was a whole chapter on reforms, which were mandatory reforms and which were, optional reforms. But things like, if you're completely eradicating women's concerns, how will you deal with the increasing violence against women in urban areas? How will you guarantee them any rights at all? So how will you guarantee swachhata for them? There are norms like toilet seats for men, one urinal for 40, 20, one seat for 20 women. But since these are the norms which are simply put on paper and not implemented or not put into policy and practice, how do women gain from it? So what are the biases which are inhibiting us from hiring women or even approaching them with with a mind of a level playing field? So affinity bias, you hire people who are like us. So as I said, that a transport secretary, the first thing that comes to your mind is it should be a woman. Intergroup bias, a cultural fit. You should hire from the same area. So in fact, this intergroup bias works well if there are quotas, and just as now Professor Patel had said, if there are more women in parliament, obviously their concerns about women will come in as a group. So this bias can actually work in our favor. Confirmation bias, that we confirm our preconception that a woman who is supposed to be looking confident, or any candidate who's looking confident, doesn't fit into our image. We feel this is lack of confidence. Whereas women may actually be knowing everything, but they may look underconfident because they haven't been given so much of an opportunity. And my own belief was that my service IAS has no gender bias. And I was interviewed, and I remember going to question 5 and then requesting the interview that please go back to question 1. I want to say that definitely there's gender bias, and we have our own bias also, that we don't try to combat the bias. We try to come up to men's expectations. And we believe that we are not good enough at our job. We believe that every time we have to prove our worth and overwork, become superwomen, whether it's in the home, whether it's a work. Now, this is a bias which we have ingrained in ourselves. So this particular, this is also the halo effect, that one positive attribute coloring perception of all other traits. Now, if you feel that you have become an overachiever in your previous assignment and you have to keep on proving that you are an overachiever, you're going to kill yourself. So, and then this halo effect works where, people have preconceived notions again, that hiring an obese woman and, 20% had described her as lazy, so they won't hire her. Now, this is a particular statement which I will say, and I would request that everybody just apply your mind to the question that comes later: gender stereotyping bias. And this is important because if you reflect on it, we ourselves are victims of this. So it says, I was typing up notes from one of our scientists when I got a call from my nanny, who was at the doctor. Upset, I rushed home to be there before the kids got home from school. Now, in this particular 3 sentences, did you think that the scientist was a woman? Did you think that the doctor was a woman? The nanny and the speaker, were they female? So this workplace bias is a continuous process. We have to actually train our mind. Even as a person who speaks on gender, very often I catch myself thinking, or rather imagining them as women or men, because that is how we've been conditioned. So women's performance reviews also, the language that is used is also perpetuating biases. Nearly 2 times the amount of language is about being very nice or warm in their ACRs, annual confidential report. So there is another bias which we have not examined and which we perhaps need to re-examine. We take our scriptures, etc., as cast in stone. So there is an important correction which was given to me by one of my very enlightened secretaries. That is Dhol Gava Shudra Pashunari, Shubd Pashunari, in Tulsi's Ramayan Sundarkand. And when I was going for a gender conference and I was very annoyed, and he said, "What is it? Why are you looking upset?" I said, "I just came across this Sundarkand, this chaupai from there, and this said dhol gawar shubd pashu nari sab hai taran ke adhikari," which means the dhol, the women are supposed to be critiqued or set aside. So he said, don't read it without the context. The context is when Ramchandra ji was to cross over to Sri Lanka, and he wanted a bridge or he wanted a passage, and he approaches Samudra Devta to say कि मुझे रास्ता दे दो, and Samudra Devta is sleeping, and Lakshman ji gets very annoyed that he's not listening to my brother, and that is the time when he says, should I dry up the ocean? So Ramchandra ji, being the more placid one, he said that wait, and Samudra Devta gets up and begs forgiveness for his laxity. He says, जैसे ढोल गवार शुद्ध पशु or Nari. Nari is not woman. Nari is god of water. Neer is pani and Nari is the god of water. So he says, मुझे भी उसी तरह punishment दो. So when we read this, for centuries we have accepted this, that this is actually about women. It is not. It is not about women. So where does change occur? Change occurs in the informal areas where women's and men's consciousness, knowledge, skills, commitment, and when they are empowered, those informal cultural norms and exclusionary practices, either they will perpetuate inequality or until formal institutions step in, interaction happens, women are given access to resources, a voice, access to critical things like health and education, then change will happen. So I am sure that many of you would have seen some films, which actually I felt that some Bollywood films I would love to share with you. Mother India, of course, I think everybody knows it was one of those mega films that has never gone off the radar. Toilet Ek Prem Katha tells it how it should be, that a sensitized man and with a family which doesn't give any importance to having a toilet, how he makes sure he walks the razor's edge between his wife's requirements and his family's tradition, and makes sure that this facility is made available and change happens not only for her. She is the one who's a crusader, but he supports her. Pink is another one which is so sensitive, especially in the present day urban context. Thappad is another one, that what is the level of threshold of tolerance one should have. Padman is a sensitization to a subject of sanitary pads which we never discuss. Lapata Ladies was a very recent one, which beautifully exhibits how women can be empowered and can use their innovation. Queen, of course. I think Kangana Ranaut has done a great job when she decides to go on a honeymoon on her own. English Winglish, Gangu Bhai, whether we are trapped in the system that we are in or we can rise above it. I would strongly urge those who have not seen Erin Brockovich. It's a true story. And Meryl Streep has done, not Meryl Streep, what's her name? Anyhow, you must see this movie because it's a real story about this woman.
Julia Roberts. Julia
Julia
Roberts.
Roberts. That's right, Julia Roberts. She's done a stellar role in describing, you see, the biases that are against her are because of her appearance, because of her being a single woman, because of her being outspoken. She overcomes all of them to seek redressal from a huge company and compensation of contaminated water, not just for herself, but for the entire community. And she would have been the last person one could have thought of. Hidden Figures is a beautiful film, which I came across. And this is Katherine Johnson's story. She's a colored woman, and the others are also colored women. In the 1961 NASA space program, these women are entrusted with a huge responsibility of making that program a success. And it's a horror when you see that they were not even allowed a toilet. There was no toilet for them in that huge complex. They had to walk across wearing their stilettos and frocks and other things, walk to another building to use a toilet. So they can be entrusted with a space program, but their needs are not met. So rethinking women-centric approaches is very important. Technical, even, and similarly, Chandrayaan also was mainly women controlled. And land ownership, that is a vital issue, access control over outputs and income. How will you ever get a loan? How will you give collateral in a bank? And more than that, my own fellow bureaucrat, when I came across his biases, he had come to HIPAA when I was director there. And he said, why are you wasting time on empowerment of women over here? In Himachal, women are pretty, they are very empowered and they speak their mind and other things. So I said, can I ask you one question? Do you have any idea what is the extent of land ownership? He said, we can find that out. We can Google it. Land owned by women. So I said, let's go back to our own families. What about your land? Whose name is it in? So he was a little offended. He said, it's in my name. I said, your wife is comfortable with that? He was even more offended. And he said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, if she is comfortable with you having the land in your name, what if the entire land is in her name and you are the husband, obviously, and she owes you her loyalty? He left the lunch table and didn't speak to me for 6 months. So women's space in decision making is limited by their access to resources, and change can only be brought about by an agency which recognizes women's needs, respects it, and trusts them. That trust deficit we have to meet. And this example from Trichy proves it, that there was a village where the women had, the kachara of that village, the entire solid waste was in the middle of the village. Now, the women actually were suffering on this count also, that there was, there was public health danger. Plus, they had no toilets. They were going about 3 hours going and coming to the jungles. And the jungle mafia was cutting the trees. So they had to go further and further. So they were wasting 3 hours, risking their own lives and coming back from the jungles for their morning ablutions. What could easily have been done was that toilets could have been created. And when this NGO which went there, it gained the confidence of these women. So they started speaking and they said, we need toilets. So they said, where do you want to place them? There was a meeting held and it was decided the toilets could be in the middle of that village. And when the women were happy that they were being heard, they started designing those toilets. And in one fell blow, they would have gotten rid of that this solid waste also. They would have created toilets. Now, the men were also participating in this, and they decided on the design. And while doing that, they realized we'll have 3 hours to spare. Women can't sit idle. So they said, okay, let's do one thing. We'll create a community center on top where we can learn skills of stitching, etc., so that we make money now. So that time that they have saved, help them to get employment. Now, having done that, they said, how will we maintain? So again, the outcome and the output orientation was very strong. So they said, how will you look after it? Will you have a supervisor? So if the cleaner doesn't clean, so they had enough money to employ somebody, but they didn't have money to hire a supervisor for that. And there was no end to that. So they decided that they'll give a room to that cleaner, the sanitation worker, that will pass through. The door of his room will be very close to the toilets and he'll have to pass through it. So if they stink, then his room will be the first one to stink. So they found an innovative solution. That is the kind of localism which programs like Kudum Shri and others, they have evolved, they have brought about an encouragement among women that they can sustain themselves in collectives, they can leverage mainstream programs, they can have even, uneducated women now today in Kudum Shri being able to have, foreign studies for their children, being able to conduct audits, being able to create old age homes. It's a wonder. Our own state of Himachal has a excellent record. It's a mixed bag, but an excellent record. Unfortunately, if you go down to the bullet below, that despite the fact that we have, Himachal reported nearly 54% local women elected in local bodies versus a 50% reservation, which means 4% women actually contested in the open and got elected. Now, despite this record, you still have a son preference in Himachal, and the 2011 census put up a question mark that, and this, mind you, Amartya Sen has mentioned it in a paper much earlier, that among the states in the north, Himachal also seems to have a problem where girl child is involved. So look at the average figures. Himachal figure for women versus 1,000 men is 974. Sorry, 900 and, yeah, so 974 against a national average of 940. But as against that, if you look at the 0 to 6 age group, our average was 909 versus a national average of 919. This was a stark difference. And this is what made us look through. We scratched the surface. Data tells its own story. And we scratched the surface and we found that there were 5 districts which were bordering Punjab and Haryana where this problem was prevalent. So, as a bureaucrat, are you going to start allocating funds for remedying this problem without looking at where the problem exists? So, that is very important. Funds are scarce. The problem may not be pan Himachal. So, it's important to do this. Now, having seen that data tells its own story, we decided that we must have the District Good Governance Index. And in any case, we were ranked #1 in 2017, then again in 2018 by Public Affairs Center Bangalore, which was headed by the retired Chief Secretary of Rajasthan. And they remarked that continuously Himachal has the lowest levels of social, economic, and gender disparity. That is very heartening. Our literacy rates are very high, but yet there are, miles to go before we sleep. So very important thing is that why does data tell its own story? Now, this is 2 things. One, is the law enough? And the second thing is how data tells its own story. Is that in Sweden, there was a film we were shown of how one municipality was cleaning its snow in the winters, and it was leading, they were getting a lot of reports of accidents on the pavements. When they looked at the data, and this is why I feel drilling data, data is the new oil and we should drill it. And the people who were using, cyclists, women, old people, children, they were sustaining injuries. So they just looked at their injury data in this municipality that was being reported in the hospital, and they discovered a gender issue where nobody had suspected it existed. The fact was that the snow clearance machines were clearing up the snow on the roads, and they also saw data that 70% of the car drivers were men. So inadvertently, men were getting a preference. The snow clearing operations were such that the pavements were getting done second time. Now, what did they do? Without spending one naya paisa from their gender budget, they simply reversed the protocol. They said that we will clean the pavements. It doesn't take too long. We'll clean the pavements and almost simultaneously we will deploy machines on the roads. So that way, men were getting an advantage which was not advertent, and women were getting disadvantaged, or old people were getting disadvantaged. The disabled were getting disadvantaged, cyclists. So this is how correction can be done if data is drilled. So data analysis is a very significant. Gender analysis depends upon data analysis. And disaggregated data for gender responsive budgeting depends upon data analysis. So it's very important. So the second thing is how law can be interpreted and read between the lines. I had a chowkidarni over here whose husband, he was a drunkard and he had left her and her children at our orchard over here. And she decided that she's not going with him. She said, you have been good to me. I want to stay here and bring up my 3 children over here. So we said, okay, we'll give you a salary, but tomorrow don't say that, you're afraid of staying. It's a lonely area we are living in, and that we will come to your help. But don't create a shindy that now my husband is dragging me out and all that. Mind you, in the 10 years that she stayed with us, this woman proved her worth. I must say that she's the one who withstood all kinds of difficulties, brought up her children, and we were there for her every time. And then one day she asked me, she says, this man still takes all the ration for all 5 of us. In fact, his mother was also there. So there were 6 of them. And he takes away ration for all 6. Why can't I get my ration for myself and my 3 children? Now I thought over it and I rang up the Pradhan, and he said, Madam, ration card can't be divided among people. Manika, the total quantum of ration going out is the same. What is the law which says that you can't divide the ration card? He couldn't come up with an answer despite the fact that he was a law graduate. And that is the time he was compelled to issue a ration card for the 4 of them and a separate ration card for that man and for his mother. Now, this ration card for the 4 of them, it's a different thing that before she could procure it, that man, through his connections in the panchayat, he swiped the ration card from there. But what I'm trying to say is, there was nothing in the law which did not allow it. So when we are looking at the law, and very often we just look at the law as it is written, we don't look between the lines. And that is extremely important. And then the other thing that is that there are many opportunities one will get to make change happen. It may not be in your native area. It may not be like I was on election duty in Surat, Vyara, in Gujarat. And that is where suddenly I realized that there is a huge opportunity because despite the fact that infrastructure is great, but I could see the need for a lot of sensitization. And I said, what better opportunity than this is a parliamentary constituency with 2,200 schools and other institutions, which was to be inspected. Now you have to see the polling booths. So first day when we went to see where the electronic voting machines would be kept, it was a huge college. So I called all the students and I said, I'm not going to be talking about elections to you. I just request you, one boy and one girl, a team of one boy, one girl. There were about 6 to 7, I think, toilet blocks over there. I said, just go and see if those doors in the toilets, they have a keel over there, a nail over there. So they were surprised and they reported back in 15, 20 minutes that none of the toilet doors had any kind of hook or a nail. So they were mystified. What does this have to do with elections? I said it has nothing to do with elections, but it has something to do with our everyday life. And maybe it may be an empowering factor. It is just my guess. So then I explained to them that when girls use the toilets, and now I think crossbody bags boys are also using, they use the toilet. And if it is a teacher or somebody who has a child or somebody who's pregnant, they need the toilet for hanging up a dupatta or a handbag. If there is no hook, nothing, the handbag is kept on the sink in a dirty place. And then when you take that handbag out, the coliform below that, it goes onto your lap or it goes onto a table, and look at the cycle of infection that it can cause. If we can think like that, we can make change happen. But this, obviously, I didn't expect that in the snap of a fingers, they'll start reforming themselves. But somewhere I think the point went home, because next time when I went to other institutions, they already knew what I'm looking for. And then when I went to other schools and polling booth areas, the staff over there, if they knew that I'm coming, they would immediately start taking nails and a hammer and putting that behind the door in every toilet. And this was good in the sense that we realized that this was benefiting the men and the women and even the police guys on duty. They got a better deal. They got inflatable toilets from the Election Commission when an objection was raised by me with them. So this is how change can happen, and it needs innovation. And women in urban today, India is about 33% urbanized. Very soon, we are going to be 50% urbanized. The world is already 50% urbanized.
Ma'am, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but it's already 5. I know it's a such interesting and engaging presentation going on, but
Okay.
we have a presentation session next. So if we could
Okay.
wrap up in next 5 minutes, it will be
I will
great.
do that. Thank you. Thank you so much. So where are we and where do we want to be? We have to make sure that our representation, resources, realm, and action plans, they involve all the primary agents, that is family, school, peer group, secondary agents, religion, and workplace. Both will give exposure. So gender mainstreaming is required in 4 key institutional sites, in which, as a bureaucrat, we have analyzed that institutional level, policy level, program level, but outcome orientation and feedback loops are missing. So I would request that whoever is taking up any subject for research in this program, please make sure that any of the policies, programs, strategies that you're examining, are there feedback loops to show what progress is being done? So if that is not there, then I think we are fighting a losing battle. Then the involvement of women, and I think I'll wind up after this, the involvement of women is extremely vital because it can impact families. In Bangladesh, arsenic was flowing from the Terai region of Nepal, and it was flowing down to Bangladesh and contaminating the groundwater. Now, what happened was that one of the American researchers who had gone to mitigate arsenic, he went to the village and he asked for a meeting with the local people. Only men were present. Women, the men said, we'll tell the women. Now, who collects water? Matke leke kaun jata hai? It was the women. These men, they had decided among themselves that, okay, these wells are contaminated. Those were labeled as not to be used, and new wells were created. Now, before this American returned, he decided, let me see what is the outcome of my, action. So he had engaged with the men, but not with the women. And he followed the women. And next morning, he realized that the women collected together and they went to the same contaminated wells to fetch water. And when he objected to that, they said, nobody told us. And then second thing he said, you see, this is marked over here. So he said, don't you know there are new wells? They said, we know there are new wells, but they're located wrongly. So he said, what is wrong with location? He said, they said they're located on the highway. And on that highway, we are parda nashi. We remain behind a parda. So we cannot be going there and drawing water from those wells. You should have asked us about the locations. Now, in addition to the kind of empowerment, political empowerment, legal empowerment that we have, it is extremely important to understand involving women in the process of decision making, planning is vital. In the Rajiv Awas Yojana slum program we had over here, we were making no headway. In fact, our officers were booted out of that area. When we put half the number of women on that committee, slum committee, then we started getting designs for our houses, slum houses, which were useful for their families, which were in sync with the needs of their families. And that is how we got 36 crore from Government of India. And we are actually recognized as the only state which put in gender concerns into this. But if gender concerns are like in this cartoon over here, that USAID road project, that what does the roads have to do with women? So they said, we'll tell the department that women walk on it. Is that the only thing that women do with the roads? So this is the outcome orientation which is residing, because if you see there are no women in this group. Now, that kind of gender blindness will definitely lead to an example which Amartya Sen also said, that handbook on nutrition, less calorie intake for women, because they were classifying household work as sedentary work without any evidence to support this conclusion. So nutrition was denied to women on this ground. So these kind of biases have played havoc with women, because compartmentalizing them, aggregating them, eternalizing them, depoliticizing them, it doesn't lead to gender-aware policy design and analysis. And the last bit is that our judiciary, which is supposed to guarantee the interpretation of the Constitution and give justice to all. From a time in 1996, when a survey of 109 judges showed that 48% believed husband slapping wives was okay and 74% believed it was women's duty to preserve family concerns even if they faced violence. Shockingly, even a sitting female magistrate sought the CGI's permission to commit suicide not very long ago due to unrelenting sexual harassment at the workplace, despite the Vishaka judgment. And we all know that after Nirbhaya, the banning of the film India's Daughter masked a deep-seated patriarchy among the advocates who were going to deal with that case. So today, 2 decades later, in 2016, not today, a few years earlier, a landmark observation by the Apex Court was made that there is a bi-directional relationship between women's empowerment and economic development. Today, we know that you empower the women, we will be adding women's unpaid contribution to the global economy is 13% of the global GDP, almost $13 trillion. And that can increase for every sector or every country. And this has been proved in the private sector, those which are employing women or a diversity of cultures, their profits have improved by 25%. There is a project drawdown also, which is proving this and which is motivating people. That is why it's a matter of huge concern that our labor force participation of women in the rural area especially is not improving. If it has improved, only marginally. But look at the people who are entrusted with the task of giving a level playing field. Thank God that in August 23, Justice Chandrachud, he launched a gender dictionary as a language construct which has been perpetuating biases and stereotypes which are very serious and which are not allowing justice to be imparted to women. So that is why it is important that today, when we look at inequality, we should look at the fact, Professor Vibhuti has already spoken about gender inequality index, on which we have a terrible rank of 157 out of 161 countries. But what can we do? Correction of these wrongs against women is going to cost the world $264 billion. Corrections will take 200 years, even more than that. Are we willing to wait for that? Or are we going to allow to make a level playing field, mainstream women's concerns, in fact, highlight those concerns, center stage them, and ensure that the economic fallout of that is a benefit which all of us gain. You invest, in fact, Gandhiji also said, you invest in one woman, you have invested in the whole family. And if we don't recognize that, then I'm afraid we will remain in the shallows that we are in. So women making up 50% of the workforce is vital for reaching that tipping point that Professor Vibhuti talked about, that the critical mass theory. We will only reach that not by just by the 73rd and the 74th Amendment, but when proactive action is taken to make sure that carpet bombing of change is a continuous process in every sector, because each sector is related and no sector is gender neutral. So now just these figures for, and this is an interesting cartoon which talks about somebody who came to survey what women, so how do you make a living? So they say, we don't work. We just stay at home, fetch water, find firewood, look after cattle, prepare the garden, plant the seeds. We did the harvesting, buy food, cook meals, do the household chores, attend women's group meetings, washing, mending for the children we bear and raise. And that's also, no, we don't work. So he said, oh, I was just wondering, wanting to check. So if this is the kind of feedback which is coming, the time use surveys which show that women do, in India, they do 9.5 times more work, the care economy, than the global average. The global average is about twice, I think, and we are way below that. We need to improve. So these are the kind of the global gender parity will take at 68.5% will take 134 years to reach full parity. India is the third lowest in South Asia. And as Professor Vibhuti had said, at forums like the earlier SARC and others, we don't have a face to show. So there are other regions are reported to be taking over 100 years to close the gender gap. So bridging this gap is very, very important. And saying that mom doesn't do anything needs that children also learn that mom, when she's a homemaker, what is the contribution of the care economy? And global average of unpaid care work is 2.6 times. India is doing 9.8 times. And this, if we don't want to earn those 10 to 12 trillion dollars, that is our choice. So it is very important that we shrink those 200 years to achieve equality of time spent in unpaid care work and make sure that we reach that equality level, not in 164 years, but in much less. Gender parity can add $12 trillion to the global growth, which was a target for 2025. But I'm sure that if we move ahead, but there is an area of concern for India, which in fact just now, this was brought to light when we were having the session on agriculture also, that's the SDGs also have a particular figure that growth will happen at least 7% GDP growth per annum in the less developed countries. Unfortunately, India in the budget is reporting 6.3% development. When it wants to become Vishwaguru, it needs 8% development every year. So where are we? The SDG says 7%. We are at 6.3%. Our desire is 8%. I'll leave you with this question. Thank you so much. If there are any questions, I'll be only too happy to answer them.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful session. Your comprehensive discussion and real-life experiences in women leadership roles in local self-governance body has offered very valuable perspectives on the barrier that women face and the strategies to enhance their representation and influence in local governance structures. If any of the participants, if any have any questions, they can ask.
Yes, ma'am. I need to ask a question that most often we talk about social injustices and violence, oppression, and the spaces which we are denied of. One major factor which I feel right now, that is emotional pressure also. There is lot of emotional pressure, that is relationship issues also. Let us take one example, that live-in relationship. Both are equally culprit if it is not socially accepted then also. But at the same time, women suffer a lot and emotionally also. Because as you have already mentioned in your presentation also, that we are in a race of presenting ourselves that we are the best players in every field. Women is facing that pressure. Uh, how to curtail that, and what sort of policy ought to be there? Do we need some legal changes in our framework also to overcome all these things? And would that be helpful, or there should be some open spaces for discussion on different forums? What's your take
In-
over this?
Can I have your name?
Mohinder Palkar.
Mohinder Pal. Dr. Mohinder Pal, I think you have answered your own question. The first thing that you mentioned was that this is an emotional issue. Very true. Who has compelled us to overwork? Who has compelled us to fit into the image of a superwoman? I have been a victim of this. I remember trying to fulfill all kinds of needs. You see, those 24 hours are never going to become 25 with any kind of law. We are supposed to see, we are first of all, what is your self-image? And I think this is where we all fail. When we're trying to fit ourselves into the image of, in fact, this is probably the best example that can be that zero size. When you have, the fashion industry, and now fashion industry is also evolving to a more humane and a more realistic perspective of having plus sizes. So the zero size was almost unattainable. So similarly, maintaining a superwoman achievement is almost unattainable. And what does it do to the others around you? Are you not supposed to ask for help? Have you imagined that the members in the family are only parasites? Or the members in your work environment are only parasites who are only going to take? Trust me, I used to think that no, I have to do everything. It is only when I realized that I can ask for help. So there was no law guiding me. It was my own emotion guiding me that what I'm doing is unfair to myself. And very often, as I said, women are victims of their own way of thinking also, and they can be each other's worst enemies as well. So this is a correction which has to come from within, because there are enough enablers in the environment to empower you. Are you willing to look for them? Are you willing to ask for help? Otherwise, the institutions that have been created are useless. So look within, ask yourself, and if necessary, if you feel there's a particular area that you want to refer to and specify your question further, you're most welcome to connect with me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome. But be kind to yourself. That is important.
Any of the participants have more questions to ask? Yes, please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. So my question is to all the panelists, if they could, because they are thought leaders in the field. I wanted to ask that there are two ways of dealing with this gender equality and the parity that we are trying to achieve. One is removing the institutional barriers, whether through laws or policies, and the second one is uh, where we are working at the individual level, where we are trying to reform the thinking, like as panelists talked about, that there are deeply embedded stereotypes which even women have, like the acceptance of double chores or the elderly care, or there is certain kind of acceptance that we have, that this is meant for us. So if we go at the individual level and start reforming our thinking at the individual level, will this whole fight of gender equality and gender parity will it not be accelerated if we start the reform at the individual level? Because once we are emotionally empowered, then the change will begin from there, and the process will the process of gender equality and gender parity will it not be accelerated if we start it at the individual level, start from changing the thinking itself of women?
Very important. Who would like to answer the question? Shall I go first? You
Please.
addressed your
No,
question.
Yeah, and I say that it has to happen at every level. We need
Yes.
progressive policies and legislation and we also need to change. Even there, because we have such a progressive constitution, still we have to fight. No? Each one of us has to fight for our rights. So I think individually, or results of
Absolutely.
previous.
Akanksha, I think Professor Patel brought about, she mentioned 73rd and 74th Amendment, and then the 128th Amendment, where you've got reservation for women. And you have seen that it has taken how many years of local bodies giving 50% reservation to women, that today in Himachal, very proudly, we can say that we have
Yeah.
gone beyond 50%.
Yes.
Correct.
Himachal is 54%. That means those 4% women are actually fighting in the open without quotas to support them. And they're winning. So there is trust in them. Now, another area where I feel that another thing was mentioned, that work in groups. Individually, if you're afraid, if you don't want to take
Yes.
risks, it's important, Akanksha, that you first think woman, then find other women who think they want change, because women won't even voice the fact that they want change. They feel status quo से ना कोई एप्पल कार्ट अपसेट नहीं होगा, कोई मुझे ये नहीं बोलेगा ये तो बड़ा अपने आप को फेमिनिस्ट समझती है, you know, that kind of thing. So one instance that comes to my mind when you asked that question was that there was a group of slum women and I was doing the closing ceremony for them, and I had just come back from the RBI and they had told about the BSBDA scheme, BSBDA, which says that there will be no frills attached. You want a loan, you just have to show your Aadhaar card and you'll get the loan. So I was very thrilled. I said, this is, cutting away all the requirements and red tapeism. So I went and I said, I must share it with all of you that how many of you want a loan? So almost all hands went up. So they wanted to do a little bit of work, thoda loan leke kuch na kuch apna set up kar lenge. And I said, how many of you have tried? Half the hands went up. So I said, how many of you have an Aadhaar card? All the hands went up. So I said, now you have that one document which RBI has just said in the new policy that is required. You go and ask for a loan again. If all of you want to go, all of you go, but go in groups. Don't go alone because you'll be intimidated over there. So, and I said, when you go there, if those people, the bank tells you that you have to get your land papers and other things, you just tell them कि हमें objection ना लिख के दे दो. Write the objection and give it to me. And we know that this is the BSBDA scheme in which only an Aadhaar card is required. Do you know, they went there and the same thing happened. They were told, no, you have to get your land papers, you have to get other things. So they did the same thing. They went in a group. So they went with their Panchayat Pradhan and they were told that, okay, they said, give it to us in writing. They said, who told you? And then they told them that we know about this scheme. Knowledge is very empowering and group is very empowering. So these women proved and they got loans. They got them sanctioned. They were not defeated. So go in groups when you feel that individual, but yes, you are absolutely right. There can be nothing better, whether we are talking of climate change or we're talking of gender. Individual action is extremely important.
Yeah, ma'am, I was talking about emotional empowerment in the context that if we know our rights and if we rise up as individual women, I think rest will be taken care of if
Of
we
course.
start right, just right where it starts, take care of where it starts. If we take care of that, then I think rest things will be accelerated. But as you said, like Vibhuti ma'am said, that these social or cultural barriers and institutional reforms have to go hand in hand. That will
Yes.
be more sustainable.
Then
Yes.
you get the protection from the state also. What happened to
Yes.
Babri Devi? She was
Oh,
doing
yes.
right thing. She was doing her duty, but she was gang raped. No? Now we have a Vishaka directive about
Yeah.
sexual harassment at workplace. So both are required. State
Both are
has to
required.
protect the individual.
And don't
Whenever
think
you
that
change, there
don't
is
think
going
that
to be
an
backlash. No.
Yeah, the backlash she had to face, and it is not. And then did she decide in the beginning that she's going to do this and she'll be fighting alone? Did she know so many people are going to support her? Did she know she's going through a rape then? But then she decided to speak up. There are prices to pay. Are you willing to take the risk? Change doesn't come without a risk.
Yeah, that is again a follow-up question that I have. Ma'am, whenever there's a issue, whether it is national or global, where any women issue is related, then why are not all women standing up for it? All women who are in positions of power. What is holding them back? This is a
Very good
question that
question.
we have
It's
in
a
mind.
very
What is holding them back in all these conferences, global conferences? They are speaking up, but when the issues come, what is holding them back? What is it? Is it conflict of interest? What is it?
Akanksha is a youngster who's using the social media, and the power of the digital is so huge that you can actually mobilize action from there if you feel afraid of starting off alone. But you can mobilize that action, you can start it alone even on social media to generate collective action. You're not alone.
That's what is shown by the SHG movement. They are the most helpless and most powerless women in the bottom of the economy. Just
Yeah.
because they come together, 20 women in one group, they come together. They are making changes in their
They're
life.
making
Right
changes.
from fighting social customs, fighting domestic violence, and empowering their children. In fact, the widows of the farmers, who
Yeah.
have committed suicide, they have formed
Yes.
their own organization, and if you read the Charter of Demand, so empowered.
My own
Not
observation, I just want to
give
share.
loan for sex determination. We will not. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, you can
I
share.
just want to share one of my experiences. Singama Srinivasan Foundation, we did a project in Mysore City Corporation. So what I observed is, I was really surprised. Till then, I didn't know. I thought that women's issue, if there is any voting, all will raise. All women will raise their hands. But it didn't happen. And it went by political, whatever is the political party they belong to. So it went by that. So
Yes.
I was really surprised. So that is one eye-opening for me. I thought that politics play a very important role, even if women want to come together. And second thing is about ma'am's presentation. And we also observed that when women are involved in planning, actually we conducted separate problem identification sessions with men and women. And women's priorities are completely different. And to a small extent, to the extent of having a road hump near school, which was not observed, because
Yeah.
it is women who are taking the children to school, and
Correct.
they proposed that. So engendering the decision making and planning is extremely important. And of course, there are institutions now, slowly things are changing, but still there is a lot to happen.
Yes, Professor Indira, also I would tell Akanksha, don't
Mhm.
be surprised by the fact that there are women who have achieved, they have broken the glass ceilings, they have achieved much more than their counterparts. But at the same time, they switch sides. They are not here to help anybody else. So that is, you see, we think that is a male preserve. That if men do it, that is the norm for them. Why? This behavior is exhibited by women also. That हमने achieve कर लिया, उसके बाद the devil takes the hindmost. We don't care. So don't be too surprised by that also.
Yeah.
So you should be
All
prepared
of-
for everything.
Yes.
We also have internalized the patriarchal model of success.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, and I wanted to also ask, like in these panels, like why are women representatives in any panel or in any commission which is related to a women issue? Why are there men sitting there? I mean, why? How can a man exactly feel what a woman is feeling?
No, one
I mean,
sec.
why
Well,
don't
depends
we
on
have?
Why do you want to exclude men?
We should
But
include.
why do you want men when they cannot? We can have one male representative, but why is it completely a male group?
It shouldn't be a male preserve.
It should not be.
It should not
Ma'am,
be a male preserve. But yes, I'm totally in favor of having equal representation. And it doesn't mean that just by having tokenism of one man there, that you have gender balanced the whole thing. That is not the issue. And similarly, for having just one woman and you have gender
Woman
balanced the whole thing, that is not our
Tokenism
objective.
should be totally.
Tokenism should be avoided at all costs. What is
Yes.
we are looking not at just representing, we're looking at outcomes. What is it that we want to achieve? As I said in HIPAA,
Exactly.
we
So
decided,
how can males exactly feel what we go through? They can only understand as an outsider. They cannot feel exactly what we are
so,
feeling. Only
so
women.
do you want them to feel? So get them to participate, no? Where your voices are being heard. They should be
Yes,
there. If
they
they're
should
not
understand.
there, they will claim, just like that Bangladesh arsenic thing, those women were
We
not there,
don't
so
want
they said,
to
"Hame nahi
exclude.
pata."
Ma'am, I'm not saying we should exclude them because we want a different perspective also, what they feel. But
Hmm.
it shouldn't be male dominated. I'm just saying that we cannot exclude them because, of course, they are half of the
Yeah,
population. We need their
We
perspective.
also, yeah, we
that's what
also
she's,
say the same.
that's what
That
she's
would be
telling.
a
At the
sustainable
risk,
We,
approach. But I see there is a woman issue, and all the panelists are males. I mean, there's just one female. That is itself is very biased, I feel, because I don't think a man can exactly understand how a woman feels when she's raped. Only a woman can understand.
men
when
He
also
can.
get raped. Men also get raped. I have worked
and
in a
also
child
sodomy,
street
there is,
children's home where
yeah,
extremely cruel, extremely brutal form of rape, boys
yeah,
and
yeah.
men, even young men. So I
Sodomizing,
think
oof, it's terrible. And that is something which is not talked about so much. That's also a result of patriarchy.
Yeah,
yeah.
But perhaps you
again,
don't talk so
yeah,
much about men suffering.
So let us talk about the hyper
gender,
masculinity. Maya
yeah,
Tyagi was it was a woman police officer who asked her constable to rape Maya Tyagi. Okay. She was the
Oh,
most cruel. We have met her. That she was the most cruel of all because she thought Maya Tyagi is a Chambalki Daku and she forced her constable to do it. So let us not talk about man or woman, whether you are a biologically woman or man. Rocky or Rani ki shadi dekh lo, the kind of character which Jaya Bachchan
yeah,
portrays.
and moreover,
Internalized patriarchy, all of us
yeah,
have.
yeah,
So
totally.
question is the questioning the hyper masculinity, which is cruel, which is violent. And this is done by both men and women. No.
yes,
And
Yeah.
sheer numbers don't make a difference. It is the
Yeah,
impact
it
of
does.
what you're saying and sensitization. As I said, those two officers who came in for that gender sensitizing training, we were simply giving training. But the moment they were so involved that they realized, oh my God, they had
yes,
tears in their eyes, that we have inadvertently, unwittingly been perpetuating so much of injustice upon my mother, my sister, my wife, my daughter. They said that for them to have reached that level of consciousness, I thought that was the biggest win-win for me as the outcome of that particular program that we had. What they can
yes,
do
Even about the
in
PCPNDT Act,
yes.
PCPNDT Act, when we initially discussed the health secretary, Mr. D.T. Joseph,
Hmm.
he just walked out. He says, your priorities are wrong. Population control is the priority. It is not the sex selective abortion. But when we convinced him through
Hmm.
data and anecdotes and case studies, once he was convinced, he was the one who convinced all politicians, extremely die-hard politicians who completely glorified male child, and they were calling us as we are jealous of couples
Yeah.
who get boys because you have a daughter. That was the level at which the discussion was taking place. But D.T. Joseph, he convinced, and we first PNDT Act we got in Maharashtra, and later on he was elevated, he became Health Secretary of India, and he convinced the very, very die-hard male chauvinist ministers that why we need to have PCP and BTA. So it's very
Vibhuti ji,
important.
even
Dialogue has to go on.
when I did the
Yes.
gender responsive budgeting, I was convinced after having attended that conference that we need GRB in Himachal, despite the fact that even the conference organizers were convinced that Himachal is pretty good. I said,
Yeah.
your own charts are showing that Himachal is declining, and I sounded like a fifth columnist. Now, when I went back and worked
Yeah.
on this, and I said, how do I get it done? Then an idea came to me, दिमाग की बत्ती जल गई, that हमारा budget speech बनने वाली है, उसमें मैंने एक policy के लिए डाल देना paragraph. When my secretary, and he, mind you, this secretary is Harvard returned, and I thought he's very enlightened. He tells me, we go to the chief minister. He says, okay, we've discussed the whole budget speech. Now, will you tell the chief minister about your project? Your project. मैं female हूँ,
I know,
इसलिए
yeah, it
GRB
is,
becomes my project.
I know,
I didn't object that time because मेरा एक मकसद था कि इसको through करवाना है मैंने,
yes,
बनाना है. बाद में देखूंगी whether I tell him this is not my project, it is everybody's project. But the fact that he was coming from his biases, he didn't even realize. Had I pointed it out to him, he would probably have accepted the fact that he was speaking from a biased position. But that's how he saw it, that anything to do with gender is a female thing.
Yes.
But as against that, we had Mr. Satish Agnihotri, IS officer, principal secretary of Odisha government. When I was speaking in Goa, because the day budget was presented by Chief Minister of Goa, I was invited by Bailan Chasad, Albertina and all to make presentation. He was taking copious notes. And once he was convinced in his own state, he was the one who started gender budgeting. So we see all types of, whether they are men or women.
Yes.
We see this type of people who, some of them who don't want change, they don't want to give up their privileges, they don't want to understand the vulnerabilities of marginalized section, and there are those who are sensitive and who change. So we have to find our allies, who are our
Yes.
allies, and we have to,
Absolutely. We have to find our allies is a very good statement. I think brilliant.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Thank you,
and I
ma'am.
think I
Any
always
other?
say, think woman. Do not delete men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is I think the newer generation is has a more extremist approach. I feel we feel like this. So
No, you
I
think
really
of gender. You think of gender, not just woman.
Not just men and women.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
then you
It's-
will be able to.
It's
Yeah.
a partnership. It's not an opposition, it's a partnership.
Yeah, it's a partnership. It's not opposition. And anybody?
Thank you.
We
everyone.
have
Thank you.
more questions.
One second, I want to take to Dr. Purnima, and it's excellent. You also discussed about gender budgeting. I was involved in a project about gender audit. So, logically, you also spoke about the outcomes. We have been looking at only allocations and what is happening to this and what comes out of that. They are not actually getting into. Actually, we did actually gender audit of some projects, each one of us. Some of us took transportation and some of us took. So it came out very well. And during that project, we also conducted training programs for auditors, senior auditors. And, they all became sensitive about gender issues and gender audit. But unfortunately, there is no continuation. And that time there was efforts to institutionalize gender audit. Because, because Karnataka, it is pioneer in gender budgeting, and where we have been presenting gender budget. But, this institutionalizing the gender audit, I think it has not yet
Very
been. I
important.
think it's very important.
Once you institutionalize, then persons may come and go.
Yeah.
So it doesn't remain the discretion of one good
Yes,
bureaucrat and one bad bureaucrat.
Absolutely.
We argued for along with CAG, in CAG, let us sensitize our engender the CAG reports itself.
Yeah.
Maybe, ma'am,
Uh-huh.
one starting point could be that we could look at statement 20
Mm.
and raise objections on that as a part of the audit, that why is it only talking of expenditures?
Yes.
First of all, did
Why
it
not
even
outcome?
think, and why not outcome? Physical, why only financial? And moreover, when those outcomes are there, are they the ones which were designed? I mean, did you desire those outcomes?
Yeah,
Or
that is
has the
another
outcome
thing.
been- Has the outcome been completely at variance with what was desired?
Yes.
So
And
even
also,
the desired outcome and the achieved outcome comparator is an audit.
Yes. And also looking at, only objectively increasing or decreasing depending on how much is spent, how much is not spent. We need to look at why it is not spent.
Correct. This is, in fact, Professor Patel, you remember, I think post the budget discussions, it was Chidambaram ji, I think, who raised a very important point that you've given, income tax exemptions up to 12 lakhs. But if you look at the revised estimates of last year, on health and education, which are so vital and which are, underfunded over here in this country, even there, your budgeted amounts have not been spent last year.
Yes.
That is criminal.
Yeah. And we don't even know why it is not being spent. What are the institutional issues, or why it is not being spent?
Performance budgeting is not our baby. That is why. We are not doing any kind of performance budgeting. We're just talking about it. We just
Correct.
do
Yeah.
lip service. We are not
Yeah.
doing it because it requires a lot of rigor. It's not
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Even audits, we need lot of
same thing.
efforts.
Statement
Yeah.
20 is the first step towards audits.
Mm.
But this time I see Himachal Statement 20, it's ridiculous. I'm actually going to raise this point that they don't seem to know what is Part A and Part B. They know only Part A.
Yeah.
So that's probably because they don't have any concept of gender audit at all.
Correct. Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
So, Prachi, do you want to ask any question? Your hands is raised.
Hello, good evening, Dr. Purnima. Thank you so much for that enlightening lecture.
Thank
I really enjoyed it. I just had a comment rather than a question, and a very focused one for that matter,
you.
particularly on the example and the good practice that you spoke about, where women came together for sanitation and public health in their village.
Yeah.
And the sanitation workers' house was made in front of the toilet so that they would be encouraged to work.
Yeah.
I sort of find myself not completely agreeing with this solution. I find it not intersectional enough, and also a little bit towards casteism, where one particular community has to take the burden of the whole village, and then it is quoted as a good practice when it is systematically designed that way. Yeah, so I was just looking at what a better solution could be there for this particular situation, apart from just putting that person in front of the toilet.
Okay. So
Yeah,
you have a
that's from
solution
my
in
end.
mind? Do you
No,
have
ma'am, I would like to find a better solution for this rather than
okay.
oppressing one
Okay,
community.
Prachi,
Uh,
first of all, maybe I wasn't able to communicate it properly to you. It was not a caste issue at all. It was that they have a sanitary worker who will be cleaning those toilets. It had nothing to do with caste.
Ma'am,
It was
every
that
sanitation worker is from a lower caste, as far
it
as I
doesn't.
know.
So
I
we
don't
are
think
not even
Brahmins are working as sanitation workers right now.
no, we are not even talking about the particular caste which is doing that job. We are talking of the innovativeness in the thinking of the women, that how do they make sure that without spending too much money, they manage to keep the toilets clean. So they said whoever is cleaning. They didn't say who is.
Ma'am, I would
Can I just
respectfully.
finish? Can I just finish?
Sorry,
Give
please
me a
continue, ma'am.
second. So what they did, they said the entry to that free room given to that person to stay, and he's at liberty to refuse that. He's at liberty to take that. It's a free room being given to him. He can use that room, but the entry to that room will be through the toilet section because, and that is not a wrong thing. I mean, you can have an entry to any place through that. If the toilet stinks, the stink will be everywhere, including first of all that room. So that was just a pressure on the person to make sure that the toilets are kept clean. And that person could be from any caste. This is not, so that was the intention, to show how innovative their solution was. And the whole idea being that government can only venture up to a certain extent. It is the person who's wearing the shoe and it pinches him, he or they will find the solution. That was the point I was trying to make.
Ma'am, if I may just, I would respectfully
No.
disagree with you again, ma'am, because I feel like this solution is not designed with a lot of intersectionality. And I'm sure that government cannot be a part of every solution. But when we talk about a certain thing as a good practice and it is being taught to the next generation, I think there needs to be some, in-depth analysis whether this solution is actually equitable for everybody in that village. And
No,
I'm
we are
sure
not
that
talking we are not
Yeah.
talking
So,
replicability. We are not
we are
say
talking about
in Bombay, right to pee. Yeah, Dr. Prachi, in Bombay, Right to Pee campaign has taken up the same issue. They also decided that the community center should be above the toilet block. And it is not only responsibility of the manager of because that is also management is also done by the Right to Pee campaign. But also the users, they also have to be responsible for keeping the toilets clean. So
Yeah.
that is the focus is not only about on the cleaner, but even the users, no? So
Yeah.
it's a big campaign of 40 NGOs in Mumbai, and they are working with 12,000 community-based organizations in Bombay district. So
And
caste
if,
question
if
has been taken.
And I guess it
So
is left to them to agree or disagree on the kind of model that they want to build in their own places. It's not foisted or foisted upon them.
if we let it happen, I'm sure most of the models are going to be casteist because it has been the land law of the land. So I just feel that we need to be a little more I don't know, more equitable while thinking about these models as well. And Dr. Vibhuti, I have heard about Right to Pee campaign, and I was not aware that they're making their the cleaning community stay right next to the toilets. But if this is the
They
kind of
don't.
pilot
They are
that,
not. They are not doing. It is the
sorry,
women's organizations meeting on the first floor.
okay,
The
okay,
meeting
okay,
place of the campaign
got it,
is
ma'am, got it.
not
Okay,
women.
ma'am.
No.
Okay, ma'am.
So
Thank
that
you,
it
thank you.
becomes the responsibility of whole community because they have a committee. Yeah, it is not the particular.
Understood, ma'am.
It is the
Thank you
women's
for that.
meeting would be on the community hall, should be above the toilet.
Above the
Okay.
toilets.
Okay.
It's
I
just
just wanted to bring
Above
utilization
the
up
of
this
toilet.
point for discussion because I felt that, quoting it as a good practice, I mean, maybe it is not the best. That's all from my end.
I won't use the word good, I would say innovative. And this is
Innovative.
to be, it was acceptable to both the parties. And surprisingly, it was
Yeah.
acceptable to all the men, women, everybody there.
Yeah, ma'am. Obviously, if you want to call it as innovative, I would see it as very traditional and very casteist, where a particular person who is involved in the sanitation work always has to be outside the village borders or near to a dirty, stinking place. So I do not see the innovation
No, no,
still.
no.
I would respectfully disagree with you, ma'am, but I do not see
That's,
an innovation.
no,
Sorry
in
about
fact,
that.
the whole idea of this is to agree to disagree. And the thing is that this was not foisted upon anybody, it was an option.
No, and right to keep P campaign, right from the campaign started, caste has become a central issue. In fact, those who have taken initiative and those who are very proactive in the campaign itself, they are from Safai Karmachari Union and Association. So they have also come up with the model which are sensitive to this issue of casteism and the caste-based layered hierarchy and the concept of purity and pollution.
So I'm glad to hear that the newer models are taking some kind of sensitization into it. That's all I would like to say. And thanks for letting me speak here.
Yeah, and they work in coordination with the Akhil Bharatiya Safai Karmachari Association, and they are also fighting against manual scavenging. So all these things, it's a complete package. Yeah.
Which has been completely eradicated from Himachal.
Which manual scavenging.
Head load, carrying head load and all that's manual scavenging. But then I
And
guess you can't say completely because there will be pockets where it happens. So
correct.
So, ma'am, I think we do not have more questions. So, I would like to thank Purnima ma'am, Vibhuti ma'am, and Indira ma'am for answering the questions so well. So, with this, we would like to head to the presentation, and I would like to invite Srija Mukherjee for her presentation. And anyone else would like to present today, kindly put your names in the chat box. Srija, you can share your PPT, and you will have 5 minutes for your presentation. So, kindly please stick to the time. Srija.
Yes, I can't find the share option.
Shrija ji, please accept our request to join as a panelist, rejoin, and you'll be able to find the share button.
Okay, thank you.
In the meanwhile, do we only have Shrija ji's presentation today? Is anybody else willing to present? Please do let us know. It's already 5:45.
also, if you could let us know what time is on the 8th of March, there's a special session on gender, I think.
Yes, ma'am. Same time, 3 to 5.
3 to 5. Okay. Thank you.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, the
Yes,
screen is
yes.
visible. Kindly do like full screen.
Okay.
Yes, it's visible.
Thank you. So my topic is navigating the margins. Um, and good afternoon, everyone. This is Srija Mukherjee from TIS Mumbai. My topic is navigating the margins, intersectional barriers to inclusivity and empowerment of marginalized women in India. So this study explores the intersectional barriers faced by women sex workers in India's red light districts of Sonagachi, focusing on their electoral inclusivity and vulnerabilities. And this research uses a mixed method approach, focusing on five key thematic areas, that is socioeconomic context, health and safety, access to justice and governance, social identity and discrimination, and empowerment and inclusion. Moving on to the introduction, this research examines the electoral exclusion of women sex workers. Despite India's commitment to universal suffrage, marginalized women face significant barriers to democratic participation due to their intersecting factors of gender, occupation, class, age, and social stigma. The rationale of the study is that this research explores the understudied intersection of sex work and electoral inclusivity in India, addressing significant knowledge gaps. It examines the barriers to political participation faced by sex workers, the impact of stigma, and the relevant legal frameworks. Problem statement is that despite constitutional guarantees of universal suffrage, women sex workers in major red light districts face systemic exclusion from democratic processes due to documentation challenges, institutional barriers, and societal stigma. These are the research objectives and the research questions of my study. I have included it in my paper, so I will try to skip this for now. Methodology and design is that I have used a mixed method study. This design enables the triangulation by combining numerical data with rich contextual insights, exploring both the what and the why of the research question. Now, topic for the means of literature review. The first one is the evolution of Indian democracy, a journey towards inclusive participation. India's democratic journey since 1950 has defied expectations, constitutional protections. Virapu, Levinson, Mukhopadhyay, Das, and Pule reveals complex state marginalized community dynamics, particularly for the sex workers. Gender-based violence is also a theme which we should explore. It has become a global challenge at present. Guru emphasizes voting as a moral dimension, Gopal Guru. This research underscores the need for comprehensive policies addressing the structural barriers and the individual agency for the marginalized community. Now, intersectionality, which is the main theme of my research, in identity politics and sex work, Crenshaw's intersectionality theory reveals how sex workers experience overlapping forms of discrimination based on gender, occupation, class, and caste. Lerem and Brens highlight the gap between research and policy, advocating for approaches that recognize the diverse experiences within the sex industry and address the complex realities of the marginalized communities. Moving on to the evolution of the feminist perspectives on sex work. Feminist views sex work evolved from the second wave condemnation to diverse perspectives. Liberal feminists advocate for decriminalization, while the radical feminists see inherent exploitation in sex work. The historical evolution and the contemporary challenges of the sex work in India is that sex work in India evolved from the ancient Vesavasa or the prostitute households, where women functioned as autonomous social agents, to the respected tawayas of the Mughal era and the temple dedicated Devadasis. British colonialism transformed this landscape through stigmatizing legislation like the Contagious Diseases Act of 1864. Contemporary sex workers face first reverse tawa terms consent to the lack of consent, entering the profession due to socioeconomic vulnerabilities. Despite Supreme Court's recognition to the rights and advocacy by organizations like the Durbar
Vijay,
Mahila
I'm so
Samanvay
sorry to
Committee,
interrupt, but 4 minutes are up.
discrimination person, I will wind up. Um, Here we can also look at the paradigm shift approach by Kuhn, that is, the traditional paradigm of criminalization of sex work and moral judgment has given way to a new understanding that frames sex work as legitimate labor. And this is from the work of van der Meulen. Also from my research, I could understand the digital transformation and electoral inclusivity for sex workers in India. The digital space gives them a sense of anonymity, which creates a safer spaces for the political engagement. And this is particularly true for the younger generations. We see a generational divide in the digital literacy. Younger sex workers can effectively use digital platforms, while the older members face compound marginalization through digital exclusion. Um, this is another work which I studied beyond the public square, imagining the digital democracy, creating a more online spaces that do not merely replicate existing hierarchies and creating more or unequal distribution and creating more equitable spaces for everyone to be there. Now, another thing which I came across during my research and my fieldwork is the story of Kumotutli in Kolkata. During the Durga Puja celebration, the soil from the Shonagachi region or soil from the brothels are taken to prepare the Durga idol. It is considered as Punnamati or sacred soil, and this soil collected by the priests from outside the brothels symbolize female energy and is believed to be crucial for the ideal's spiritual potency. The tradition may have originated as a means to include the social outcasts into religious festivities or to honor the Navkanyas. Yet, despite the symbolic recognition, sex workers face severe discrimination in their daily lives, lacking basic rights, documentation, and access to essential services. The formation of the National Advisory Committee on Inclusive Election, that is called the NACIE, represents a significant institutional commitment to addressing the electoral participation of marginalized communities, including sex workers, transgender individuals, and other vulnerable groups. There's a few photos from my fieldwork in the Shonagachi region of West Bengal, the Chunav Pathshala, which occurred last year in December in Shonagachi. Now, I would like to highlight some of my fieldwork experience. During my fieldwork in Shonagachi, Kolkata's largest red light district, I witnessed a community that defied simple categorization. As I walked through the narrow lanes, I encountered a vibrant social ecosystem where daily life unfolded with its own rhythms and hierarchies. From air-conditioned Nilkamal building, housing the higher-earning sex workers, to the cramped brothels below, the physical space itself told a story of social stratification. The most striking revelation was the devastating impact of the missing documentation. I met Subhadra, a 65-year-old woman who was trafficked here at the age of 6. Her trembling hands and tearful plea for help highlighted the crisis faced by these aging sex workers without official papers. Without IDs, they cannot access basic services like healthcare, banking, or government support schemes. Through my interactions with the Durbar Mahila Samanvay Committee, which is an NGO working in the region, I saw how community organizations provide crucial support networks. However, the fundamental challenge of documentation remains, trapping many in the cycle of systemic exclusion. My research points to the urgent need for policy reforms, particularly in recognizing alternative forms of identification for this vulnerable population. These are few of the awareness programs which were conducted by the CEO of West Bengal for the sex workers in Shonagachi. Um, Now, the transformative impact of sex workers themselves, and they serve as a crucial lifeline for the community operating on multiple fronts to empower and protect its members. This is pictures from the voter registration drive at Shonagachi. And these are a few of the initiatives, electoral inclusion initiatives taken by the election office for the sex workers, by the CE office, by the DE office, district election office, or the booth level officers at the Chunav Pathshala implementation. Concluding, this research through this research, I would like to highlight how gender intersects with occupational vulnerability to create unique patterns of political marginalization. The findings demonstrate that limited awareness and lack of identification documents serve as a primary barrier to electoral participation, rooted in broader systemic issues of social stigma, economic marginalization, and institutional discrimination. This research contributes to both the theoretical understanding of democratic exclusion and the practical policy solutions for promoting the inclusive participation. Ultimately, thus advancing more inclusive democratic practices in India. So that was all for my presentation. These are the references I used for my presentation. And thank you so much.
Shrija, have you included
Hello?
Ma'am, we lost your connection for a little bit.
Yeah, I was just asking whether, Shrija, you have included child rights in this whole discourse.
Ma'am, I have
That's
not
it.
included child rights, but I have interacted during my field work. I have interacted with the sex workers, and they told me that there has been a shift. Like previously, the sex workers' children were not for them to get enrolled in the schools. They had to give their father's identity,
Fathers.
and
Yeah.
they were they told me that we used to give the babu's identity. They call them babus, their clients, babu's identity. But now that shift has occurred. Now their mother's identity is being recognized, their mother's work is being recognized, sex work is being recognized, and their children are getting enrolled in the schools.
And also under is right to RET apply, right to education applied to RT is applied to them. Another thing, are there SCDS centers in Sonagachi? How are they functioning? Are they given all the this thing right from a midday meal to inoculation, vaccination program, health checkup? Because ICDS centers elsewhere do that, no, for children. So all those
Yes.
facilities, services of the state instituted in that area.
Sir, ma'am, I couldn't, in Shonagachi, I couldn't witness any such centers there. I didn't see any such centers. But, ma'am, the Durbal Mahila Shamanway Committee, the NGO which is working there, they run their own health centers. Like, it's a private NGO, but they run their own health centers.
Yeah.
They give, they told me that we try to vaccinate the children of sex workers too, so that and they told me an instance from COVID-19 that they effectively effectively managed the COVID situation and reduced the number of people getting affected due to COVID. So they are the people who are working, that NGO is working very effectively in that region.
So I think this mother's name being acceptable and school enrollment is not a problem. This you should end because that has been a long drawn fight. Because during
Yes.
70s they were not allowed, and NGOs used to run night schools or the schools, night schools, because mothers were busy at that time, so they were looking after children and also teaching them. But now I think they can have a formal schooling, so that you can, because now even the same issue comes when women, for the women prisoners' children, no, because they
Yes.
also have a right to, they should not be confined in prison. They have a right to go to school. So now even in all the prisons in Maharashtra, children of prison, they go from prison to this thing, and they also have a facility for study. So that I think you can include.
Yes, ma'am, I will include that part. Thank you, ma'am.
Very lot of exhaustive. Right.
Thank you.
Comments from Professor Indirani ji, ma'am, any comments?
And I was going through Srija's
Yeah, she was in
proposal.
touch with her.
proposal,
Back-
and also
back and
some
forth.
most of the time the non-governmental organizations, they are providing the kind of support and they're standing by them. Like we have an example of Ashodaya in Mysore.
Yeah,
It is good presentation, Srija.
very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Srija, for your presentation. So with this, I would like now to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel ji of the chair of this program to deliver the closing remarks for today's session.
Yeah, I think we had a very important session today because the person who are working at a ground level, both from the state and maybe from the non-state, both the perspectives we got. And it is very important that we function at all three levels. One is a bottom-up approach and collective approach. Other one is that you become a change begins from you. That is very important. And also systems and structures we need to make, which are enabling and empowering to women. So I think these are the learnings that we had from all the deliberations we had, and also the kind of illustrations and case studies we got. Thank you very much, Dr. Purnima Chauhan. I thoroughly enjoyed, and Dr. Professor Indira, if you would like to say.
No, I really enjoyed Dr. Purnima's lecture, and she has given so many examples how it is important for women to come together, and how the systems are important, how the institutions are important. It's not just only empowering women and making them aware of things, but there should also be systems for them to exercise their agency. So it's a really excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Purnima, and thanks to IMPRI for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's always been a delight being a part of this series.
You made a very good comment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The kind of experience that you have and the kind of illustration that you give, it actually inspires me. It whets my appetite for knowing more and more, because here I actually come across women who are working in the government, working in HIPAA, where I had the Gender Resources Center, and she has been tortured by her husband. Now she's into a second marriage. And, when she wanted answers, I said, you start handling the gender center, so that, the answers will come. I have no ready-made answers to give her. None.
All of us are learning from the experiences. Coming up with the strategies.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your remarks. So this concludes the day 9 of Young Women Leaders in Public Policy Fellowship Cohort 2.0. So with this, I will like to move to formal vote of thanks as we end to the day 9th of the Young Women Leaders in Public Policy Fellowship Cohort 2.0, an online national winter school program, a 4-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program. I, Sana Ansari, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose a formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, New Delhi. We would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Professor M. Indira ji, and Dr. Purnima Chauhan ji for joining us today and providing valuable insight for this program with their esteemed presence as well. We thank all our participants who have raised important questions and actively participated throughout today's deliberation. Reading for the session will be shared within your emails, and video of this session will also be shared for your future learnings. We eagerly await your presence in the upcoming session scheduled every Sunday and for the special session on March 8th on the occasion of International Women's Day. We are grateful if you're watching later on YouTube or listening to us on various podcasts or reading our publication. We hope you continue to join in for future IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning programs as well. Wishing you a very good evening and thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you,
Thank you, Sana, for conducting the session so seamlessly. Thank you very much. Thank you, Priyanka ji.